Good morning. Thank you for joining us for another in a series of hearings examining how comprehensive tax reform can help spur economic growth. Today's hearing is an opportunity to look more closely at the manufacturing industry. Specifically, we'll examine how the current tax system affects U.S. manufacturers, including U.S.-based public companies, small and closely held manufacturers, and foreign-owned U.S. manufacturers. We'll also explore how comprehensive tax reform might affect manufacturers' ability to expand and create jobs. The importance of the manufacturing sector to the U.S. economy has been well established. In 2011, manufacturing accounted for 12.2% of the country's gross domestic product and approximately $1.27 trillion in exported goods, according to the Commerce Department's Bureau of Economic Research. With a long and treasured history in America, manufacturing touches every aspect of our lives. From the food we eat, to the cars we drive, to the clothes we wear, the impact of manufacturing is felt each and every day. Supporting about 1 in 6 private sector jobs, the manufacturing industry is a cornerstone of our economy that provides high-paying and high-quality jobs to approximately 12 million people, according to June's Labor Department data. Manufacturing is closely connected with research and innovation, which improves our lives and our standard of living. Whether small, medium, or large, whether publicly traded or closely held, manufacturing companies contribute to the American economy every day. Nowhere is that more evident than in my home state of Michigan, the heart of the auto industry and the engine of the industrial Midwest. Manufacturers have been hit particularly hard in this country. Since the President took office, we've lost over 1/2 million American manufacturing jobs. According to the Department of Labor, the precise number is 590,000. So as we examine the effect of our current tax code, as well as the implications of comprehensive tax reform, the importance of understanding how tax reform can make America a more attractive place for the industry to hire and invest can't be overstated. A recent op-ed authored by the National Association of Manufacturers sums up the challenges posed by today's tax code, stating, manufacturers have added 13% of the net new jobs gained since the end of 2009, and we have made larger than normal contributions to gross domestic product. But there is a black cloud looming with much uncertainty ahead. The op-ed goes on to describe the impact that those looming tax increases will have on manufacturers, both for individual and corporate taxpayers. Citing a recent survey, 64% of manufacturers describe the tax and regulatory environment as their top concern. The concern expressed by the manufacturing community is well-founded, and it is a concern shared by many on this committee and in the Congress. We're all familiar with the statistics. The United States has the highest corporate tax rate in the world at 39.2% if you combine federal and state. The high corporate rate in our outdated worldwide system of taxation do little to attract the investment and hiring we need to help get America back to work. Similarly, as the NAM authored op-ed reminds us, businesses paying at the individual rate are also affected by today's broken tax code, not to mention its December 31st expiration date. If the tax relief originally enacted in 2001 and 2003 expires, then 2/3 of manufacturers that operate as pass-through entities and pay taxes at the individual rate will face even higher tax bills. The bottom line is that today's tax code isn't working. It's not working for the manufacturers that are organized as pass-through entities because it is too complex, too costly, and too expensive to comply with. It isn't working for manufacturers who operate internationally because it is outdated and leaves America uncompetitive in the global marketplace. Most of all, it's not working because it's not helping families struggling in a weak economy get back to work. It's time America's tax code puts the American economy first. We know that what doesn't work, and now it's time for a comprehensive tax reform plan that will work. Since this Congress convened in January of 2011, the Ways and Means Committee has had more than 20 hearings focused on the steps Congress might take to transform our broken tax code into a pro-growth code that will provide employers the certainty, the flexibility, and freedom they need to invest and hire. At the request of the Ways and Means Committee, the last 2 House-passed budgets have outlined a framework for comprehensive tax reform that lowers rates for individuals and corporate taxpayers, repeals the AMT for 31 million households, and transitions America to a more competitive territorial system of taxation, which even the Obama administration pointed to as a, quote, hopeful area of consensus, end quote. The framework is a good start, but more must be done. Today, we'll hear directly from stakeholders in the manufacturing community as they share their ideas for what Congress can do to help and what we ought to avoid that might hurt. Your voices are critical to this discussion, and after all, it's not enough simply to write a plan that reads well in Washington. It has to be a plan that works in the real world, the world where you run your businesses. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today, and I look forward to your testimony. I'll now yield to Ranking Member Levin for his opening statement.
Thank you and welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you for coming. During the 2000s, we experienced a crisis in manufacturing employment. During the 8 years of the Bush administration, we lost 4.5 million manufacturing jobs. Now, since the recovery has taken hold, the manufacturing sector has added about 500,000 jobs. We've seen that gain in manufacturing employment over the last 2 years, and now we hear talk about a resurgence of American manufacturing, in part because of the policies of this president. The president took the difficult but vital step of providing assistance to the domestic auto industry. If he hadn't done that, it would have devastated the manufacturing sector well beyond the big three and even beyond their suppliers. The Recovery Act included key provisions like the 48C credit to encourage investment in advanced energy manufacturing. The tax agreement at the end of 2010 included 100% bonus depreciation for capital investments. But more needs to be done, clearly. We are still below where we were at the end of the Clinton administration by about 5 million manufacturing jobs. Ways and Means Democrats, we here have introduced a no excuses agenda of items like bonus depreciation, the wind credit, R&D, 48C, Build American jobs, and a provision to reduce the incentive to ship jobs overseas that this committee should act on immediately to promote job creation, especially in the manufacturing sector. This committee should act on these provisions as soon as possible. Today, we are considering how manufacturing fits into tax reform. Tax reform must fit into support for manufacturing. Eliminating every corporate tax expenditure, including the domestic manufacturing deduction, R&D, and accelerated depreciation, would not pay for reducing the corporate rate to 25% and could work against further support for manufacturing. The President and Democrats in Congress view, in terms of tax reform, the larger goal is one of economic growth and job creation. Just setting a rate and not saying how you will get there doesn't really tell you whether you are achieving those goals or not. We think manufacturing should be at the heart of our goals for tax reform. Manufacturing still provides millions of middle-class jobs, conduct more than 2/3 of private R&D, accounts for 60% of exports, and has vital positive spillover effects in the broader economy. Secretary Geithner said this very well before this committee in February. He said, and I quote, "I would say we would look at any proposal through that simple test, which is relative to what you face today. Are we making it more likely that the next factory by a U.S. company or a foreign company will be built here?" End of quotes. Republicans often say that they don't want to pick winners and losers. It is not picking winners or losers. It is picking what side you're on. Being on the side of those who want to build things in America is not picking winners and losers, but winners for the American public. That's why we think tax reform needs to mean a great deal for the manufacturing sector. That's a major purpose of the hearing today, and we look forward to hearing our witnesses' thoughts on how we achieve that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levin, and we're pleased to welcome our excellent panel of experts who have extensive experience running both large and small manufacturers. I believe that their experience and insight will be helpful as we focus on tax reform as it relates to their industry. First, I would like to welcome and introduce Ms. Diane Dawson. Ms. Dawson is the Chief Tax Officer and a longtime employee of Ford Motor Company. Ms. Dawson, thank you for being here today. To introduce our second witness, I'll yield to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my privilege to welcome also Mr. Skip Jersdahl from 3M, who's the Vice President of Tax and Real Estate, who we'll hear from in just a little bit. Skip has worked in the tax department, actually, at 3M for over 12 years. He has a strong background in tax and also has worked previously at Cargill, which is also based in Minnesota. He brings a strong wealth of knowledge from a manufacturing perspective on tax policy and the impacts that U.S. companies have in competing in the global marketplace. He was born and raised in my district, in the 3rd District of Minnesota, and I'm proud to welcome him here. He's been a good advisor to me from a corporate tax standpoint as well, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Paulson. And now to introduce our witness from New York, I'll yield to Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure. I'm pleased to introduce Susan Ford, the Vice President of Tax at Corning Incorporated. As you know, Corning Incorporated is headquartered in my district in Corning, New York. This company has been around for 161 years. It's the world's leading manufacturer of high-technology glass and glass ceramic components. It was founded by Amory Houghton, the great-great-grandfather of former Congressman Amo Houghton, who, as you know, was a member of this committee for many years and a good friend to many of us here on this panel. Corning is proud to have invented a number of technologies with significant impact on the world, including optical fiber, ceramic substrates for catalytic converters, and is the world's largest producer of glass for LCD TVs, and a lot of our material, our phones and other materials have that material on them. So I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to introduce Ms. Ford, and I look forward to her testimony, and I welcome her and yield back the balance of the time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Reed. Our fourth witness will be Mr. Ralph Hart, the president of Jagman Stamping Company in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Aside from his work at Jagman, Mr. Hart brings a wealth of experience from managing several other small manufacturing businesses. And fifth, we'll hear from Mr. Kim Beck, the president and CEO of Automatic Feed Company in Toledo, Ohio. Mr. Beck had so much good information to share with us that last night after his flight from Toledo to Washington was canceled, he hopped in his car and made what I imagine must have been close to an 8-hour drive to Washington, D.C. So, Mr. Beck, thank you for your commitment and fortitude in making the effort to be with us here today. Our sixth witness will be Mr. Hugh Spinks. Mr. Spinks is the Vice President of Tax for Air Liquide USA, located in Houston, Texas. Additionally, Mr. Spinks is on the Tax Committee of the American Chemistry Council and serves on the Board of Directors for the Organization for International Investment. And finally, we'll hear from Ms. Heather Boucher. Ms. Boucher is a senior economist at the Center for American Progress here in Washington, D.C. Thank you all again for your time today. The committee's received each of your written statements. They will be made part of the formal hearing record. Each of you will be recognized for 5 minutes for your oral remarks, and Ms. Dawson, will begin with you. You're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Camp, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the committee. I am the Chief Tax Officer of Ford Motor Company, a manufacturer of cars and trucks headquartered in Dearborn, Michigan. We employ over 66,000 at 25 manufacturing facilities and other office buildings. And we thank you for holding this hearing on tax reform in the manufacturing sector, which you all understand is the most important sector in the American economy. Ford has manufactured cars and trucks for over 100 years. But not that long ago, we were fighting for survival. And we stood up in that moment and developed a plan to aggressively restructure the company. We rationalized our brands. We leveraged our global strengths to build high-quality products more efficiently. We revised labor contracts. We funded post-retirement health care. We funded pensions. We restructured the dealer network. And to fund all of that, we took out what everyone describes as the largest home improvement loan that was secured by all of the assets of Ford, including the trademark Blue Oval. And over the last couple of years, we've repaid over $20 billion of that debt, and the Blue Oval belongs to us again. And we did all of that against the backdrop of the severe economic conditions at the time, and we did it outside of bankruptcy. In short, we've restructured every element of the business that we could, and we've returned to profitability in the U.S., but our tax expense does remain internationally uncompetitive. We're grateful that Republicans and Democrats have recognized that the U.S. corporate tax rate is simply too high. Chairman Camp's discussion draft and the President's framework for business tax reform both suggest much lower rates. We are very hopeful that the time for reforming America's uncompetitive corporate tax code has arrived, and we believe that lowering the corporate tax rate is the single most important and efficient and simple way to relieve the burden on U.S. companies. Ford understands that in the current fiscal climate, it's likely impossible to achieve a lower rate without broadening the base. We also understand that base broadening comes with costs that must be weighed against the value of the lower rate. As an American manufacturer, Ford is interested in several tax provisions of broad applicability that do encourage important U.S. investment. First, the research credit. Many other countries have both a low rate and incentives for research. The U.S. should not put itself at a competitive disadvantage by heading too far in the opposite direction. Second, depreciation. Reasonable cost recovery periods, at least consistent with expected economic wear or obsolescence, are critical to support continued U.S. capital investment. And third, the domestic manufacturing deduction, which recognizes the special advantages manufacturing activity provides to the U.S. economy. We're hopeful that a lower rate and a reformed U.S. corporate tax code will be a net positive for American manufacturers to permit us to continue strong U.S. investment. Ford does operate globally and builds vehicles where its customers live. We earn a large part of our income in the U.S. Abroad, Ford generally operates in relatively high-tax countries, and we do not have substantial foreign earnings that have been taxed at very low foreign rates and that can only come back to the U.S. at a very high U.S. tax cost. And for that reason, Ford does not have a particular position on how the U.S. taxes foreign earnings. Whatever the method, Ford believes it is appropriate for corporate tax reform to provide some minimum level of U.S. tax when corporations shift income to tax haven countries. We see value in all three anti-base erosion options included in Chairman Camp's proposal, and note that lawmakers need not necessarily choose a single approach to combat tax base erosion. The transition to a reformed code is also important to Ford. In particular, we are interested in how transition rules will apply to foreign earnings and profits deficits, to foreign tax credit carryovers, to foreign taxes that have been paid but not yet claimed on tax returns, and to overall domestic losses. In summary, for over a century, the United States has been Ford's home and its most important market. Ford wants to remain profitable in the U.S. and to pay income tax at a reasonable rate, similar to the rates now levied by other countries. The stakes for corporate tax reform are high, and the consequences of failure are serious. We know it won't be easy and appreciate all the more your willingness to tackle this important task. We at Ford stand ready to help you in any way we can. On behalf of Ford, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dawson. Mr. Jersdahl, you are recognized for 5 minutes. You need to push the button on the microphone.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Camp, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the committee. My name is Skip Jersdahl. I'm the Vice President of Tax and Real Estate at 3M Company. I thank the committee today for the opportunity to address the important issue of tax reform. As you know, the U.S. corporate tax rate is the highest tax rate of any country in the world. In some cases, the high U.S. tax rate is mitigated by tax credits and deductions. These credits and deductions, however, often fail to adequately encourage a behavior they're intended to incentivize and create competitive imbalances between U.S. companies. In addition, the Internal Revenue Code has not kept up with the rapidly changing international business environment. Virtually every developed country has responded to these changes by adopting tax systems that provide their domestic corporations the tools to compete in the global marketplace. Also, part of this new global reality is that nearly 50% of the world's public companies, and frankly many of our competitors, are now based outside the U.S. and Western Europe. They start with a competitive advantage in the marketplace because of the lower tax rates they enjoy. 3M submits that the U.S. could take a few key steps to address these competitive imbalances while simultaneously creating greater simplicity and predictability for its domestic corporations. First and foremost, we recommend that the corporate tax rate be reduced. We support the Chairman's proposal to reduce the rate to 25%, a rate which is more in line with other developed countries that view a lower corporate tax rate as a competitive advantage. We recognize that a large reduction of the corporate tax rate would require substantial offsets from existing deductions and credits. For example, 3M utilizes the Section 199 manufacturer's deduction, accelerated and bonus depreciation, and the R&D credit. The manufacturer's deduction provides a significant benefit to our company since 3M has half of its manufacturing base in the United States. However, lowering the rate to 25% would offset the benefit of this deduction and would also eliminate the complex and time-consuming record requirements required by the Section 199. 3M would also support the repeal of accelerated and bonus depreciation to partially pay for a significantly lower tax rate. While depreciation provisions provide a significant benefit to the company, these rules merely change the timing deductions and result in an upfront cash flow benefit. Importantly, they do not impact the tax rate reported by the company in its financial statements. Finally, 3M would also forego the current R&D credit for a significantly lower rate. As one of the most innovative companies in the world, 3M believes that intellectual property development must remain a cornerstone of American business. 3M spends over $1.6 billion a year on R&D. However, today's R&D credit provides insufficient incentives to encourage R&D investment in the U.S. because it is based on incremental spending on a limited portion of R&D expenditures. And, of course, its temporary nature limits its effectiveness. If Congress wishes to continue to encourage R&D here in the United States, there are numerous ways to substantially improve the incentives for research development and the ownership of intellectual property. For example, a so-called patent box could provide a low rate of tax on income generated from intellectual property developed and owned in the United States. This would not only encourage investment in IP, but it would also encourage its retention in the U.S. Lastly, 3M applauds the Chairman's inclusion of a territoriality system in his proposal. We agree with the 95% exemption system rather than the alternative systems that would create unnecessary complexity. A territorial system would bring the U.S. in line with most developed countries, including the UK, Canada, Germany, and Japan. In addition, such a change would facilitate a partial or full repeal of many international tax rules, which are amongst the most complex and controversial rules in the Code. Replacing those rules with a territorial system would greatly enhance simplification and transparency. Again, we thank the committee for inviting 3M to speak today. We support its efforts to achieve comprehensive reform with a substantially lower rate and territoriality to yield a simpler and more transparent code and to help American companies compete in the global economy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jersdahl. Ms. Ford, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Camp, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the committee. My name is Susan Ford, and I am the Vice President of Tax for Corning Incorporated. We are a glass technology and research company located in upstate New York. Mr. Reed gave great background for Corning, so I won't cover most of that, but I do want to hit a couple of points that give us context for our discussion. Corning does have approximately $7.8 billion in sales as of 2011, and we have 29,000 employees worldwide, of which more than half of that payroll is located in the United States. Corning takes a tremendous amount of pride in its heritage as one of America's oldest and most innovative companies, the company that has been said to recreate itself. Corning spends about 10% of our global revenues in R&D, about 98% of which is conducted within the United States and mostly in upstate New York. We have manufacturing in 11 of the 26 states in which we operate in this country. Corning is also a global company, however. Approximately 79% of our sales are to foreign customers. Corning operates in many industries where the customers and competitors are predominantly or entirely located outside of the United States. To survive and prosper, Corning must operate there as well. I'll give you an example in our display business. Display is our largest segment at Corning, and it is the segment that makes the LCD glass in the televisions. The glass that we actually make is formed in sheets that are about the size of a king-size bed, and they're about the width of 4 times the human hair. So you can imagine that shipping that kind of glass, nothing good happens when you ship it thousands of miles. For that reason, we'll often locate our manufacturing facilities in the same, obviously on the same, frequently, on the same piece of land as our customers. Because foreign markets are a larger proportion of the global consumer demand, we must be able to grow both, not just domestically, but internationally. This is true for Corning and many other U.S. manufacturers working to compete in an intense global market. We need tax policy that is competitive while continuing to incentivize innovation and job creation in the United States. The current tax code's manufacturing and R&D incentives, tax rates, and worldwide system of taxation are complex and simply no longer globally competitive in our view. I'll give you a brief example. For Corning, our U.S. effective tax rate in 2011 was approximately 37%, and our foreign rate was approximately 17%. This was principally due to the fact that some of the foreign jurisdictions in which we operate provided significant incentives for capital investment. Again, these are business decisions that were made to be close to our customers because our product is difficult to ship, but additionally we received some incentives that allowed us to earn income at some lower foreign rates, particularly in Asia. This is very common in Asia. For this reason, we're very heartened by the growing consensus among U.S. policymakers in general for the need to reform the U.S. tax code. Some of the points I'll make are a bit repetitive to the prior two witnesses, but I think they are important enough to have another mention. Two principal points. I think the lower rate is very key. The lower rate will allow for a couple of things. One is its universal applicability, right? It will help domestic manufacturers. It will help companies that export from the U.S. It will help companies who are competing with foreign importers, for example. And secondarily, I think that the lower the rate can go, the less likely companies are incented to move income offshore. The second part of Mr. Camp's proposal that I think is a principle that improves competitiveness is the territorial system. This is particularly important to multinationals like Corning, who are based in the U.S., have significant employment in the U.S., but must compete with foreign companies abroad in their countries of home. Excuse me. We believe the territorial system, a non-territorial system currently is a disadvantage to U.S. companies because it costs more for us to to repatriate income versus our competitors. We do acknowledge that moving to a territorial system presents some transition challenges, and we acknowledge Mr. Camp's proposal of foreign earnings inclusion is an appropriate response to that. We appreciate the reduced rate on those earnings because companies like Corning often have earnings abroad that are in capital and in buildings and infrastructure that can't be returned. This presents a particular hardship for companies like Corning when tax is on all of the income, but the cash cannot be returned to pay those taxes. I think as a final point, it's important to note that base erosion principles, I agree with Ford in the sense of there are three of them there and a balance can be used. We do believe that option C encourages companies to keep their innovation here in the United States and their IP here in the United States because it does tax that income at a lower rate. It allows us to be more competitive with other companies, again, who have these intangibles offshore and pay lower rates on their royalty income. As patent laws around the world become more sophisticated and their enforceability improves, the historic benefits of having U.S. technology ownership just no longer serve as sufficient compensation for a higher U.S. tax burden on the related income. In summary, we do believe tax reform is a necessary action for the competitiveness and economic health of the United States and the manufacturers in it. For U.S. headquartered companies competing at home or abroad, the current system is cumbersome and inefficient. Many developed nations have modified their policies to facilitate competition and encourage domestic investment. The United States should not allow its trading partners to gain an advantage through tax policy modernization. Moving to a competitive territorial system with a competitive tax rate will result in benefits both to the United States and its manufacturers. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Mr. Hart, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Camp, Ranking Member Levin, and all committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on an issue that impacts manufacturers of all sizes, especially small businesses like ours. I'm Ralph Hart, president of Jagaman Stamping, based in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Chairman Camp got it pretty close on introduction, thank you.
Right.
Family-owned business with 300 employees where we manufacture precision metal parts and export 22% of our products to over 15 different countries. We have a subsidiary in Nashville, Tennessee with 33 personnel as well. I'm also chairman and owner of another small manufacturing company in South Carolina with 31 employees in precision grinding and finishing. My involvement with these three small businesses located in very different parts of the country gives me an excellent understanding of how to compete globally and grow investments in our equipment and our employees. We are also members of the Precision Metal Forming Association and National Tooling Machining Association, which together have about 3,000 companies, averaging 50 employees per business. Most are family-owned, and about two-thirds of these companies are structured as subchapter S corps or similar pass-throughs. How our businesses are organized and the way we pay taxes has the single greatest impact on our companies and how much we can reinvest in our businesses. For example, one of our members, a New England-based manufacturer with roughly 200 employees, will see a 6% effective tax rate increase this year compared to 2011, assuming no congressional action will take place, and could jump as much as 15%. With so much uncertainty over upcoming tax increases and changes, small companies and small manufacturers like us are becoming very conservative right now, or frozen in place and possibly not making significant investment in our business. This is a very important point. The uncertainty in the tax code and what the future holds keeps many manufacturers from investing as much as they should or could to grow their business, purchase new equipment, and hire new employees. In fact, even the Federal Reserve Chairman, when testifying recently before Commerce, said the global and other uncertainties are slowing the demand for capital investment. This is simply the wrong thing needed for our country right now. In order for manufacturing to succeed in this country, we need stability and transparency in our tax code. In our industry, we often have to invest millions of dollars annually into new equipment, research, and training for our employees to remain globally competitive. We therefore fully support expanded bonus depreciation, Section 179, domestic production activity deductions, as tools manufacturers use to create jobs and compete globally. For example, our precision grinding company in South Carolina with barely 30 employees just bought a new machine for $270,000 that require 3 additional new employees to operate, a 10% increase in our workforce. What many policymakers in Washington do not understand is, unlike larger corporations, small manufacturers like us are required to provide a personal guarantee for most loans when purchasing capital equipment or expanding our facilities. I just recently signed a personal guarantee for the new $270,000 grinder I just mentioned. This means as a small business owner, I have to put even my family's home on the line and take significant risk if I want to grow my business and compete globally. In Wisconsin, our investment over the years come up to $147,000 per employee, and we spend over $500,000 in research and development. There's a lot of noise in Washington right now about only raising taxes on wealthy to pay for government programs and hopefully balance our federal budget. However, small businesses, we may report $250,000 more in profit, but few manufacturers actually take those profits home. They were overwhelmingly reinvested in the business and our employees manufacturing in America. Based upon an industry survey, most small manufacturing business owners pay a combined tax rate of 36%, distribute 18%, however, reinvest between 46 and 50% back into the business. Tax increases also result in reduced cash flow potential, further limiting access to capital, which is already difficult enough for small business lenders to secure. Lenders and other investors in a new business look at the tax implications as closely as we do, whether deciding or not to fund new manufacturing investment. We again need a reformed tax structure in this country which encourages Americans to start, and I emphasize this is important, to be compelled to start or expand their new manufacturing businesses here and hire new employees here in the U.S. Comprehensive tax reform to us means fixing the problem for both traditional C Corps and S Corp pass-throughs at the same time, the vast majority of which are family-owned. With over 70% of all U.S. manufacturers structured as pass-throughs, companies like ours contributing the overwhelming economic activity in the sector, which accounts for a substantial portion of our GDP. However, small manufacturers are ready to step up to the plate on tax reform and forego some tax credits and deductions if it means a lower effective rate for all manufacturers and solving our nation's budget crisis. However, we cannot afford to fix the problems on the backs of family-owned businesses and only address larger corporations or multinationals without remembering that, again, 70% of us in manufacturers are structured this way. I strongly urge politicians to move beyond labels, rich versus poor, employer versus employee. No manufacturing company can succeed without strongly investing in their employees and equipment. Tax reform needs to happen for everyone. On behalf of Jagman Stamping, Jagman Precision Plastics, LabTech Industries, and all of our employee associates, I thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hart. Mr. Beck, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Camp and Mr. Levin and members of the committee for holding this hearing today and giving me an opportunity to participate. I'm representing small manufacturers, even smaller than Mr. Hart's here, and also AMT, the Association for Manufacturing Technologies, made up of 600 manufacturers across the United States, with sales, most of them of less than 7 million. I'm here to convey to you the toll the Great Recession has had on this nation's small business, particularly small manufacturers like Automatic Feed Company. And I'm going to tell you that small business owners have great concerns about the words and actions coming out of the federal government. This year marks 63 years of continuous operation of Automatic Feed Company in Napoleon, Ohio. We were devastated by the recession. We almost didn't survive. In just 12 months, we had a drop of revenues by 90%. Our sales went from 30 million down to 4 million. Prior to the recession, we had 110 employees. They were highly skilled engineers, welders, machinists, and machine assemblers. 48 of them were skilled union employees. And over that 2-year period, we dwindled down to 25. Many of us averaged in the company 40% pay cuts, and the top management took 60% pay cuts, and they still haven't been restored. I've spent the last 4 years trying to save our company. We survived because we made the necessary sacrifices, and we had very little debt. The banks were under such scrutiny that they were not lending, especially to small manufacturers tied to the automobile industry. Today, small manufacturers are angry that after they have made such great sacrifices, they are now being asked once again to finance a government that is too large, too inefficient, and fiscally irresponsible. The rhetoric out of Washington against small businesses is getting louder every day. Why would our government punish small manufacturers with higher taxes and other imposed cost burdens when we are the ones creating jobs? It is illogical and unfair. Often it seems as though the largest impediment to our growth is our U.S. government. Higher taxes, more regulations, increased health care and energy costs, outdated policies, and complicated broken tax code all contribute to a significant competitive disadvantage American manufacturers face when compared to foreign counterparts. In 1975, when I came into this business as a young man out of college, U.S. manufacturing and machine tools was #1 in the world. Today, we are #7 behind China, Japan, Germany, Italy, Korea, and Taiwan. Automatic Feed Company has no U.S. competition. Our competition comes from companies that are 100 times larger than we are. They are German, Korean, Japanese, Spanish, and Chinese. For us to consistently outpace our competition, we need to have a lower cost structure. Part of that lower cost structure has to be able to lower the regulations, lower taxes, and help us compete worldwide. One of the biggest obstacles is our own tax code. Today, the United States now has the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. It significantly contributes to an unlevel playing field for American manufacturers. Bad tax policy is not only anti-competitive, but it also leads to less tax receipts collected by the federal government. Bad tax policy outsources jobs. The President proposed letting the Bush tax cuts expire for those making over $250,000 a year. When our elected leaders are going to realize that a tax increase on those who report higher incomes is a direct tax increase on manufacturers like me. Partnerships, LLCs, sole proprietorships, and subchapter S corporations are a significant share of those that are considered wealthy under this tax law because we file individual income taxes. When in all actuality, none of us bring home $1 million into our own homes each year. We take that money that we make and we reinvest it into salaries for our people, for R&D, and for modernizing our plants and facilities. The 3 or 4% tax increase means a lot to small manufacturers that are starved of profits during the last recession. We could use that money for reinvestment and help rebuild this economy. 100% tax bonus, increased Section 179 expense levels, and R&D tax credit should be extended now. R&D tax credit has helped us in developing a new product line that we've been working on for 5 years. We haven't made a cent on it yet. It hasn't hit the market, but without the credit, we may have not even tried. In the long term, we need to tackle tax reform across the board. We need to increase the tax flow to our companies through investment and also free up more days of operation for covering our processes. And also, we need to help out our current estate tax rates. I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I urge you to take action necessary to help strengthen small businesses and small manufacturers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Beck. Mr. Spinks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the issue of corporate tax reform to produce a more simple, predictable, and competitive tax environment in the U.S. My name is Hugh Spinks, and I appear today on behalf of Air Liquide USA, one of the nation's leading industrial and medical gas companies. Air Liquide is the world leader in industrial and medical gases. We operate in 80 countries around the world, employing over 46,000 world citizens. Headquartered in Houston, Texas, Air Liquide USA has over 5,000 American employees in more than 200 locations throughout the country, and actually a physical presence in all 50 states. For decades, Air Liquide has offered industrial and medical gases and related services to the nation's largest industries, including manufacturing, electronics, and healthcare. Air Liquide is focused on technological innovation to help make our nation's manufacturing and industrial sectors more efficient, environmentally friendly, and productive. The industrial gases business is an essential and thriving cornerstone of American manufacturing and technology, reaching into every conceivable sector of the economy. Air Liquide is committed to significant growth and domestic expansion, and in fact has doubled its investment in the United States during the last 5 years. This investment has created new jobs and access to critical products and technologies in communities throughout the nation, from Texas to North Dakota, from California to Delaware. We see the future for U.S. manufacturing as bright and rich with opportunities, but we are also pragmatists in the distribution of our resources. In deciding where Air Liquide will make its investments, we examine all of the potential costs, including taxes. With such a large and capital-intensive operation, we oftentimes have more potential projects than capital on a worldwide basis, forcing difficult decisions about where to allocate scarce resources. Corporate tax reform should be designed in a manner that encourages global companies like Air Liquide to make increased capital investment in the United States. This requires, among other things, a level playing field, one that is not punitive or discriminatory based upon where a company is headquartered. Over the last couple of decades, many countries have significantly lowered their corporate tax rates to attract new business investment and create jobs. For example, U.S. competitors in such diverse geographies as Canada, the United Kingdom, and recently Japan have significantly lowered corporate tax rates and passed legislation to simplify their taxation of business. With Japan's 2012 corporate rate cut, the federal plus state income tax rate of about 39% in the U.S. is the highest in the OECD. This puts the U.S. in a position of trying to compete for new investment projects with countries whose corporate tax rates are often 7 to 10 percentage points lower. In spite of the many advantages that the U.S. offers as a premier location to do business, trying to achieve an equivalent after-tax return on investment under these circumstances is challenging. With a lower corporate tax rate of 25%, as suggested by Chairman Camp, the U.S. would be better able to compete for new projects. As an internationally headquartered company, Air Liquide is part of the dynamic business community of global companies that play a critical role in the health of the U.S. economy, particularly in the manufacturing sector. The U.S. subsidiaries of global companies employ over 5 million American workers directly nationwide, including 2 million in the manufacturing industry. These companies produce 21% of total U.S. exports, conduct 14% of domestic research and development spending, and account for 17% of U.S. corporate income tax payments. I applaud the committee's recognition of the important link between tax reform and inbound business investment. To conclude, we support comprehensive tax reform.
and we understand there will be trade-offs in the pursuit of a lower rate as well as greater certainty and simplicity in the tax code. I thank the committee for inviting me to testify and would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Spinks. Ms. Boucher, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Camp and Ranking Member Levin and members of the committee for inviting me here to testify on the effects of tax policy on the U.S. manufacturing sector. My name is Heather Boucher. I'm Senior Economist with the Center for American Progress Action Fund. I want to make 2 points in my remarks this morning, which I expand upon in my written testimony, which I've submitted for the record. First, manufacturing is not only a key part of our economy, but moving forward, it will remain critical to our nation's economic vitality. Economic research is increasingly showing that manufacturing is critical to our future. A strong manufacturing industry supports solid middle-class jobs. It enables our nation to be a leader in technology and innovation and can help us address our trade deficit. Second, there are a variety of ways that policymakers can support manufacturing, of which reforming the corporate tax code is one piece of the puzzle. The research is clear that any set of policies aimed at supporting U.S. manufacturing should include investments in education and training, infrastructure, basic and applied research and development, and improvements to basic data collection. In terms of tax policy, to support manufacturing, I recommend that this Congress focus on a few key items. First, pass comprehensive business tax reform that both eliminates loopholes and inefficient business tax expenditures without disadvantaging domestic manufacturing. Currently, loopholes allow companies to avoid paying U.S. taxes by artificially shifting their profits offshore. Closing these loopholes by adopting strong provisions to prevent base erosion that will promote job growth in the United States and ensure businesses are both competitive and fairly taxed. Along these lines, we need to introduce a minimum tax on foreign earnings to prevent production from going to tax havens overseas, as the President has proposed. This would also ease the tax code's current bias towards foreign as opposed to domestic investment and level the playing field among competing businesses. We also need to find a fiscally responsible way to make the research and experimentation tax credit permanent in order to boost and attract domestic private investment in R&D. Studies have shown that the R&E tax credit stimulates as much research and development investment as a direct subsidy, and that the social returns on R&D are greater than returns for private investors who finance R&D. I want to stress that the level of taxation is only one piece of the puzzle, and the statutory corporate rate is only one aspect of the corporate tax code and how it affects businesses, as we've heard already this morning. But I also urge you to keep in mind the reason that we tax. Tax revenues fund public goods that U.S. manufacturing and global corporations that manufacture in the United States benefit from and which otherwise would not exist. For that reason, when considering levels of taxation, it is equally important to weigh the benefits of the public goods and services made possible with taxpayer dollars. When it comes to creating good manufacturing jobs in the United States, government spending plays a critical role in setting the stage for economic growth. To promote manufacturing and innovation in the United States, or at least to not disadvantage it relative to other industries, we recommend improving infrastructure so that U.S. goods can be more easily transported and marketed at home and abroad. This should include addressing our aging and overwhelmed electrical grid, as we've all learned about here in the District of Columbia over the past few weeks. Implementing the Obama administration's proposal to start an $8 billion community college to career fund to encourage collaboration and partnerships between community colleges and businesses in training our future workforce. 2 million workers would learn skills vital to working in burgeoning industries like advanced manufacturing and healthcare. A highly skilled workforce would also give the U.S. and its regional economies further advantages over its global competitors. In addition, we should increase government investment in advanced manufacturing and establish a national network for manufacturing innovation. Having a strong manufacturing industry in the United States should be at the top of our national economic agenda. We will not be a global leader for long without a vibrant and innovative manufacturing base. The industrial commons matters for innovation, and the extent to which we allow manufacturing processes to continue to go overseas, we only make it that much harder to regain our place as a global leader. Moreover, As more of our energy future will rely on high-tech manufacturing, our economic competitiveness, and in fact our future trade deficits will be even more closely aligned with our ability to be an innovator and producer of manufactured goods, especially in the energy sector. I want to thank you for inviting me here to testify, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Boucher. Thank you all for your testimony. I do have a question for Ms. Dawson, Mr. Jursdal, and Ms. Ford. I mean, several witnesses at the table as manufacturers have testified that lowering the statutory rate is so critical to America's ability to compete that it's worth giving up substantial deductions and credits. And some have also talked about the importance of encouraging domestic innovation, moving to a territorial system with anti-abuse rules. Now, would a 25% rate, a territorial system with reasonable safeguards to prevent shifting to low-tax havens, and adequate incentives to conduct R&D and locate intellectual property in the U.S. be attractive enough to you that even as manufacturers who benefit from numerous deductions and credits, you'd be willing to put all other tax preferences on the table? And why don't I start with Ms. Dawson?
Sure. I think the very fact that you've called this hearing means that you recognize those provisions do have power in the economy, and I don't think it's time quite yet to choose which ones stay and which ones go, but I am here to say that when that time does come, they will be all on the table, and we will want to be at that table helping choose what helps the U.S. economy go forward. And for Ford's business to go forward in the U.S., I'll say again, we think the low rate is the single most important thing, and beyond that, we would look for more stability, simplicity, so that whatever is in there is something that I can communicate to management to help decision-making, and hopefully that would support decision-making that keeps investment in this country.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Jursdal?
We'd certainly be willing to put every preference on the line. There's no question that a lower tax rate not only would be evening the playing field for all companies here in the U.S., the other thing it would do is it would really simplify things and create transparency. Right now, the tax code simply is not believable, and that's not only to the public at large, that's to the executives at 3M. I find it almost impossible to explain the tax code to them these days. They don't believe me. It's so complicated. So frankly, going to a lower rate, putting
I'm familiar with that problem.
It's a very difficult proposition. But frankly, putting all the preferences on the line for a lower tax rate is definitely the way to go.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Ford?
I would echo the comments made. I think everything should be considered, particularly when you start to get towards a 25% rate. It does make us more competitive. I think the overriding concern, of course, is that rates can have a very easy tendency to creep back up. So I think it's really important that we think through the other provisions that we remove as they're incentivizing to particular behaviors, and then avoid a subsequent kind of rate creep up over time.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Hart and Mr. Beck. Earlier this week, Ernst & Young released a report that analyzed what would happen if we were to adopt the administration's proposal to let taxes on small businesses go up at the end of the year. Roughly, it's the $200,000 for individuals, $250,000 for couples. And among other conclusions, the report finds that if that proposal were enacted, that it would destroy over 700,000 jobs and that wages would fall by 2%. Now, I would just ask both of our small manufacturers, how would this proposal affect your businesses specifically?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, approximately 70% of the manufacturers in the United States are structured as S-corps or pass-through entities. And there's only so much of the pie. You have taxes to pay out of the pie, reinvestment in your business, which is by far the overwhelming portion where our profits goes. I just mentioned that yesterday we were installing a $270,000 grinder, which is in excess of the $250,000 you just mentioned, which comes out of profits of the business. And of course, to repay borrowings for things we may, to our banks. And again, they're wanting more profits in the business as well to justify borrowings these days. Borrowing money has been a little tougher the last couple of years. So to me, it would directly impact investment. If you switch up the pie, shall we say, and it would be negative for us. The real issue we have today is uncertainty. I need to mention that again, that we're making decisions borrowing money, personally guaranteeing loans, hiring people, and the uncertainty with that proposal also is very concerning to us.
All right, Mr. Beck.
I agree with Mr. Hart. When you take a look at a company like ours, that basically my brother and I own the company, if you make $1 million, that means as a Subchapter S company, would pay the taxes on half of that, on $500,000 of it. My brother would pay the other half. Money comes from the company, but we're not taking that as revenue into our own pockets. That money that we make has to be reinvested in the business. If you take 3 or 4% more, we've already gone through a great recession. We are starved for profits. We're hoping to make some profits this year. We'd like to hold on to whatever we can and not have to give it back as far as taxes are concerned, to reinvest that in training our people, because now we've had to hire back a lot of people. We haven't put investment back in our company because we haven't been able to. We'd like to do what Mr. Hart is doing and upgrade our machinery. And 3 or 4% to a small company like ours, I think, has a lot more impact than the revenue that's going to be generated for the federal government.
All right, thank you. Mr. Levin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I think if we can, we should resist using this hearing to have an overall discussion of the very basic disagreement as to the high-income tax cuts. I'm not sure the situation for the two of you, but joint taxes told us that only 3% of small businesses have income over $250,000 a year. So the Ernst & Young report is deeply flawed in terms of its methodology, assuming that none of the tax cut, the end of the tax cut for high income would go for deficit reduction. It has other deep flaws. But if we spend our time today arguing over this, I think it will be a mistake. I thought the focus was the importance of manufacturing. And what's happened in these last years is there's been a resurgence in understanding of the importance of manufacturing in this country. The language became that we were in a post-industrial era. And it turns out, as shown by what's happened in the last couple of years, that manufacturing remains a very key part of our economy. And it's helped to lead us back from the pit and help to create jobs. And the difference of opinion about that was crystallized in our reaction to whether we would let a couple of the domestic auto companies go under and not be able to come back. So I would hope we could have a focus today on the importance of manufacturing and how our tax code relates to it and how we approach tax reform, keeping in mind the importance of manufacturing. And I think this panel illustrates the challenge for us to do that and to simply say, let's have a goal or a policy of reducing to a certain level without taking into account what would be the impact on manufacturing, I think is misguided. There are differences of opinion among all of you as to what would be the impact of the focus only on the rate without determining its impact on manufacturing. And I understand that difference of opinion. Your companies are in different positions. To say that everything should be on the table, that's, I think, okay, provided you keep in mind the objective of what you look at when everything's on the table. And I think the testimony, if I might say so, on manufacturing by the two of you illustrates that. And so, Mr. Hart, without discussing larger issues of taxation and upper income taxation, I think it's revealing when you say on page, the pages, I guess aren't numbered, and you referred to it, and I think it was important. You said, we fully support expanded bonus depreciation, Section 179 expensing, and Section 199 domestic production activity deduction as tools manufacturers use to create jobs and compete globally. And I think it's important to remember that, because if you eliminate those, you don't get down to 25%, eliminate everything. And the question becomes, what happens to these incentives for manufacturing? Should we have them? And then, Mr. Beck, and you say, I think very compellingly, on page 3, bonus depreciation and increased 179 expensing can be deciding factors for businesses considering equipment upgrades or company expansions. These two incentives most assuredly contributed to the impressive growth in manufacturing technology orders in 2011. And then you go on to say, there's no question on page 4, R&D leads to new technologies and innovation, and you conclude on page 4, without the credit, we may not have made the investment. So I think that illustrates how we need to approach this, not with a simple mantra, but with a question, is manufacturing and the tax code supporting that an important criterion in terms of tax reform? And I think the answer clearly has to be yes, is a major priority.
All right. Thank you. Time has expired. Mr. Johnson's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hart, you know, it's a testimony to the great entrepreneurial spirit that's helped make this country as great as it is. It's too bad the President and others are attacking this spirit. I'm sure you've heard by now President Obama say, quote, if you've got a business, you didn't build that, somebody else made that happen. Mr. Hart, did somebody else build your business?
It was a team effort with myself, my partner, and all our employees, but we took the risk, that's a fact, and continue to.
And government didn't build your business either, did they?
Government can assist. Government can assist with certain incentives to help invest in what we do, to make sure we're globally competitive, but we took the majority of the risk, that's a fact.
You bet. Mr. Hart, with respect to tax reform, would you be willing to put all the various deductions and credits on the table for a top rate of 25%?
It's a little bit difficult for me to answer that. To be honest with you, the reason I say that is I do believe that in small manufacturers like ourselves, cash flow is a key priority to what we do. And that some of the incentives to recognize investing in the U.S., to spending capital, to taking risks, for encouraging people to get into the business, such as we've mentioned the depreciation deductions, are beneficial. However, saying such, looking at the total effective tax rate and looking at lowering the total effective tax rate to allow us to put more into our business is very critical and would be very welcome. And I'm sure both of us, two small guys here, would do that.
That's close. So tell me, what 3 key points would you like to leave with us when it comes to tax reform?
First of all, that manufacturing is very important to our economy, and we do need to look at manufacturers, both large and small, C corps and pass-throughs, as being very vital to our economy. And I need to support my brethren to my right here, the larger companies, because they're my customers. And so they need to remain competitive too, and we need to make sure that we make all manufacturers competitive. Secondly, I encourage us to continue to look at incentivizing people to get into business, to start businesses, to build businesses that are vibrant to the backbone of the country, and to feel confident that they can take the risk and they know with some certainty what's going to happen if they take the risk. I need to mention again, uncertainty is very difficult when running a small business or a family business. And so those are really my 2 key points that I need to leave with the
Thank you. Mr. Jersel, as you may know, earlier this year, the administration released its framework for business tax reform, which calls for a minimum tax on foreign earnings. What are your thoughts about that proposal?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because, first of all, we don't know what that rate might be. Secondly, we don't know how the foreign tax credit mechanism may work with it. At a high level, though, it concerns me. First of all, it just suggests to me that this will increase complexity, not decrease complexity. And furthermore, I don't see it really helping us compete in the global marketplace. I still believe territoriality is a much better answer.
So you more or less think that we need to have a less complex system, right?
Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Yes.
Okay. And such a proposal that that we're hearing could cost jobs in America, could it not?
Pardon me?
If we try to stick with a high rate of overseas.
Absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
Sir. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Nunez is recognized.
I don't have a question at this time.
All right. Mr. T-Berry is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the two manufacturers, the pass-throughs, Mr. Hart, Mr. Beck, I don't remember which one of you in your written testimony talked about buying a piece of machinery over $250,000. But the question's to both of you. Okay. Well, my question to both of you is I can't imagine how frustrating it is in Napoleon, I'm from Ohio, or where you're from, to hear the president or others talk about the fact that you are obligated, you should pay more because of how much money you make. And I think your testimony is so very good to try to help educate policymakers and the rest of America that if you make $250,000, I think you mentioned that, as a business owner who is a pass-through entity or an owner of a business, talk a little bit more to us today, both of you, real quick, what that means in terms of reinvesting in your business. Out of that $250,000, you have to buy machinery. You have to employ more employees. There's training cost. So it's not like you're pocketing it and saving money to go buy an island in Hawaii.
As a pass-through, if like you're subchapter S or sole proprietorship and you have $250,000 of income from your company, you'd pay that taxes on your own, through your own personal tax forms. And it appears that to most people that it would be your salary, but it's not your salary.
Can you say that again?
It's not your salary. It's what your company made, which means that out of that $250,000 that goes to taxes, the rest, you know, you may take a salary of 50, 60, 100,000. I don't know what people take. You know, small businesses might take $50,000 out of salary in their own pockets. The other $200,000 would be reinvested. What is not paid in taxes would be reinvested into their businesses.
So if the rate's 35 today and it goes to almost 41,
Yeah.
the top rate tomorrow, 6%, that's pretty significant.
Well, I want you to know, 2 weeks ago, I met with my joint venture partner in Germany, and I asked him if he wanted to invest in a company in the United States. So we compared corporate rates, and he said, your corporate rates are too high. And he said, the most I'll invest with you is maybe 20%, when I was hoping to him coming in and doing a 50% investment into a venture together. And he just basically said, and that's Germany. That's Germany.
Mr. Hart, any add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the majority of the profits that we make are reinvested into the business. And that's not just us, the surveys show it. So there's only so much of the pie to go around. And secondly, we need to leave a lot of the profits and our cash flows in the business today to keep our banking brethren happier, because it's tougher to borrow money today without a profitable business.
And so if the rates are increased, that's less that's reinvested.
It's less that's reinvested, and it's less that can be potentially borrowed as well, because the banks aren't as happy with their cash flows.
Thank you. To the three on the far left, all three of you, American, large companies, do business overseas. Start with Ms. Dawson, if you could all answer this question. You're competing when you're selling a Ford in Italy. You're competing with German companies, you're competing with Korean companies, you're competing with Italian companies, and you as well. So to the three of you, how difficult is it today to compete when their rates are lower and we have a worldwide system? And how does it benefit us as Americans when you are expanding in Europe or expanding in Asia? How does that benefit America? Does it benefit the corporate headquarters? Do you have more employees at the corporate headquarters? Can you just comment on that rather than this thought of shipping jobs overseas, which is a mantra of some?
Well, that's a little bit of a complex question because, of course, wherever you compete, in Italy, let's say, in Italy, your profits in Italy are subject to the same tax whether you are BMW or Ford. It's where the more movable profit is, right? It's where the entrepreneurial profit is. It's where maybe the profit from intellectual property resides.
But if you
And if those
repatriate
key
if you repatriate your profits from Italy to back to the United States versus if the German company repatriates it back to Germany, there's a disadvantage for you.
Yeah, tends not to be our issue. That repatriation issue tends not to be our issue. But I would say it's correct that where the residual profit resides, for us, it's headquarters. For us, it's the U.S., and that is a pain that other companies headquartered elsewhere do not suffer, I will say, on that type of profit, on their entrepreneurial profit.
All right. Just quickly, just time has expired, so if you could, other two, just answer very quickly.
Okay, just a very quick example. Let's assume we make $100. Our competitor that's overseas makes $100. We pay a tax rate of 35. They pay a tax rate of 24. We have $65 left. They have 76. It's just not a matter of making extra money. They now can reduce their prices by $10, $11 and beat us in the marketplace and hurt competition. In terms of jobs, yes, jobs can be created. 50% of our manufacturing is in the U.S. A healthy company will promote HQ jobs, and most of our core R&D is here in the U.S., so of course expansion of R&D would create jobs in the U.S.
All right, thank you. Very quickly, if you could.
Yes, I would just echo briefly that I think the job situation is not a zero-sum game. It's not, U.S. jobs versus foreign jobs. It's if you have to have foreign locations and increase your foreign jobs, your U.S. jobs will increase as well. We found that both in our R&D center, our IT world, and our corporate headquarters as well.
All right, thank you. Mr. Rangel's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you so much for sharing your views with us. My questions are basic. I want to thank you once again. Territorial taxes. How does it affect, or how does it create jobs or any benefits to the United States if U.S. business decide to go overseas and pay no taxes to the United States, but whatever the tax rates in foreign country? How does America benefit? Ms. Dawson?
Well, we're not particularly a proponent of one system or another, but if it was pure territorial with no anti-base erosion provisions, that could be a worry. I think that's where the anti-base erosion
Is anyone
provisions
supporting
come in.
a pure territorial tax? Is anyone can tell how can America get some taxation out of business people that were trained and enjoyed the benefit of being American and not pay any taxes at all, pay the taxes to the foreign government at their lower rates? Anybody here support any type of territorial tax? Come on, all of you said you support it. I just want to know, how does our country benefit by your support for it?
We support a territorial tax system primarily because it helps us compete with our international.
How does it help the United States of America? It helps your stockholders, is that it?
No, it doesn't just help our stockholders.
How does
First
it
of all,
help the United States of America that you can effectively compete with?
well, 50% of our manufacturing base is in the U.S., so if we can compete on an international scale with our international competitors, it will help our manufacturing base.
So you're saying that the profits you make overseas by not paying U.S. taxes helps the base back here, where you hope that you'll be paying a lower corporate tax?
It certainly will help the base back here, both in terms of our
And
manufacturing.
if you have no base back here?
We would never be at that point.
Strike that. Suppose we create that you don't have to have a base here to have a U.S. Business abroad. And so I would think under that hypothetical, we won't benefit at all. No jobs, no taxes, no, you're just a foreign company with a U.S. base with no jobs. That's possible too. Let's get, we have to do a lot of work on this territorial thing, and the chairman is an advocate, so I think you do better explain it than they do, not at this time.
Well, we do have base
however.
erosion provisions in the draft.
Okay, okay. Let's get to the corporate tax. So you tell me what the one impediment it is for us not to reform the tax system where liberals, conservatives, Republicans, and Democrats and others all agree that it's loaded with provisions that should be eliminated, that there is no problem in reducing the tax and paying for it by broadening the base, and yet when all of you get together at the country clubs and the cocktail parties, you know what it is that stops this Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, from not taking up this sensible reform that has us as the highest corporate tax provisions in the entire world. Now, you don't have, I don't need all of you because I'm convinced that there's one thing that all of you have agreed upon that stops us from doing the right thing, economically and politically. Now, what is it that you believe it is? Okay, the chairman says maybe my question isn't that clear. But if everyone agrees that this is good for the country, the corporations, the stockholders, America generally, the creation of jobs allowed to be more effective, why aren't we doing it? Is it a question that everyone wants to protect their interests? I mean, is anyone here that believes that when we clean it up that we should get rid of research and development? No. If we were talking about depreciation benefits, you want that. I just wonder whether it's a question that corporates want lower rates, eliminate the loopholes, but don't bother their loopholes. And so we can't get you guys to agree. As Ms. Dawson said, everything's on the table, and when we get there, we'll tell you what we insist on and what we'll, but if it is such a good deal for America and the Congress, and you guys pay so much for lobbyists, what reason do you hear that we have not moved on it? Not this administration, not past administrations, and we're not going to do it because of what? Why don't you think we do it? You all are smart Americans, business people.
Well,
Ms. Dawson, please.
for myself, I will
So
say.
if you could answer quickly because
I will
time
do
has
that.
expired.
Oh, for
Just quickly.
I am a chief tax officer, that is my job. I would say that a reason is it's just darn hard. Before I came here, I kind of reread the story of the '86 Act. Really, really hard. And you
I
can
was
only
here.
do it kind of
See,
once.
what is the hard part of it?
It's the hard part. And we are
weren't
ready.
drafted.
We're here
We came
because
here
we're
to do
ready. The
hard- we're
chairman's
here to
ready.
do hard work. You're here to make us do hard work. What part of the job is so hard that you can't figure out why we refuse to do what we were sent here to do?
Well, I think the time is right, and hopefully you
The
think
time has been ripe
is
since
right.
1986.
Well, thank you. Time has expired. Mr. Davis is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I would point out that companies like Procter & Gamble, headquartered in my district or across the river from my district, have almost 50% of their employees are directly related to international business. So territorial taxation makes a lot of sense. And I know there's a lot of undertones for manufacturers. I grew up around manufacturing, blue-collar background, worked in manufacturing, run with manufacturing small business owners now. And, the only club that my friends belong to is Sam's. And I think that's an important thing to point out, and understand this issue of the S-corp issues, the pass-through issues. But I'd like to bring some context on these issues of tax reform, particularly for the small manufacturers that make up the backbone of the supply chain, feeding into the parts into my Ford F-250 I've been driving for 15 years, and thanks for the Ford Tough. I appreciate that. Mr. Beck, in your testimony, you took particular time discussing the importance of expensing, of depreciation, and the R&D tax credit. You and Mr. Hart are both small business owners. It's the, the core of what I look at as a person with a lot of experience in manufacturing. You describe these provisions as especially important to cash-based manufacturers who face particular challenges in managing their accounts receivable and their working capital. You guys live on accounts receivable, on that weekly cash flow, making sure that that cycle is compressed. Would you please provide the committee, starting with Mr. Beck, some examples, very specific examples of how the AR cycles and the working capital needs of small manufacturers affect your businesses, and how these tax provisions help smooth out that cash flow roller coaster?
Well, from a standpoint of a machinery builder, we have to have enough cash to float maybe sometimes with certain customers, $3, $4, $5, $6, and $7 million projects. Now, that's not the same as somebody that's making parts and components for an automobile company. But the only way that we can possibly do that is to have profits and to retain those profits and retain the cash into our company. And if you use some of the vehicles that you've talked about, like accelerated depreciation, when you do that, you show more expense for that particular year. But what that really does for you, it does allow you to write off the equipment faster, which means you have a less of a tax burden from that standpoint, which means you're not paying as much in taxes.
Well, let me take that to the next level. I think that generally we spoke before the hearings for a couple of minutes when we met, but we agree that a reduction in the tax rate and a transition, particularly for the international businesses, to a territorial system would be very helpful, particularly in a variety of ways. But and they're important reforms. But do those reforms alleviate, say, that lowering of the rate, the territorial piece? Does that alleviate the need for maintaining some sort of cost recovery positions in tax reform for you as a manufacturer?
Well, I'm not a tax expert. So.
I guess let me put it this way. What I'm hearing you say is that depreciation, expensing, and R&D as part of this process are very important to you.
Well, it is very important to us because you can recoup quicker the costs that you put out there to help develop something or to buy a piece of equipment, which allows you to expense it faster, which causes you to have less revenue in those years that you're doing that, which means that you're paying less in taxes. So you're able to hold on to your cash longer. And if you've gone through a situation like we've gone through and banks won't even talk to you because of the requirements that they were under, we had to hold on to every single penny. So basically it sounds very simplistic, but it's the revenues coming in, it's your expenses going out, taxes is part of your expenses.
Not at all. I mean, I had clients in the 90s when the Clinton tax increases, when those rates went up so significantly, literally couldn't hire employees to do additional work because of the tax hit on them as S corporations closely held. You would like to comment briefly, Mr. Hart?
Yeah, I mean, the timing of cash flows is critical to a small business. I mean, when you're trying to grow your business, you have cash being tied up in receivables, money's owed from your customers, and of course, usually in the manufacturing business, you have to buy equipment as well. And of course, the banks want to see positive cash flow to lend you the money, and you have to make payroll during that whole period, including hiring new employees, paying for training dollars. We have great apprenticeship programs at all of our divisions that we fund internally. So the timing of cash flows is key. So retaining cash into the business, investing cash into the business, expense deductions for depreciation to help maximize that cash flow during investment time periods is very important to us, extremely important.
Great. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Buchanan's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. Also, I'd like to thank our witnesses today. According to Enterprise Florida, which is our economic development arm in Florida, there are 17,000 manufacturers in Florida. They employ over 300,000 folks out of Florida. These skilled personnel represent about 5% of the state workforce in the state. In my district, Atlantic Mold and Machining opened about 5 years ago. It's a family-run business that specializes in high-precision plastics and metal molds. And again, I was chairman of the Florida Chamber, and I was in business for 35 years and employed a lot of folks. I want to get back to Mr. Hart, Mr. Beck. I got to tell you, I did a hearing where we had small business people in there about 2-3 years ago, and I just, for one reason or another, started the hearing out with having people raise their hand in terms of that had challenges with their banks, either got their line of credits reduced or whatever. I thought it'd be about 20%. About 95% of the people in the room raised their hand where they had challenges. It gets back my point I want to try to make here. When we talk about employment or people, they talk about 3% of businesses, I heard a gentleman say. The bottom line, there might be 3% of small businesses as they measure at 500 employees or less, but the reality of it is what is that percentage in terms of revenues and in terms of jobs? I know a lot of middle market companies that are considered small companies, but they might employ 300 employees or 400 employees. So from a tax standpoint, what do you think would be the simplest fare? What would be best in terms of helping your businesses moving forward in terms of based on where the tax code's at today? I mean, my sense, what I hear is people want a simpler, fair, flatter tax, a tax code 73,000 pages. I mean, what would your thought be based on where we're at today would be the most helpful, Mr. Beck, to your business?
Well, when I was filing my taxes on a paper basis and now it's electronic, I think I had a stack that I brought home from the accountant that was about that high. Now, you can imagine the intricacy and the amount of work it goes in to create those taxes returns. To tell you exactly what the percentage ought to be, I think that's what needs to be worked out not by us, but by the committee, because you're looking at the revenues that the government needs. However, a flatter tax, a simpler tax, one that doesn't change with the wind, one that's set, helps businesses plan accordingly for the long term. You know, we have to be able to plan for the long term. We have to be able to look out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. You know, when I developed this product, I got the R&D tax credit, you know, it's 5 years into it and we haven't made a penny off of it yet. We're hoping in this next year that we can bring it to market. So we have to look out, and small businesses are in it for the long term. They're not in it month to month. Small businesses are not looking at the quarterly or the monthly return. They're looking at the long-term viability of their company, and so we need a very stable tax code, and we need one that competes internationally.
Yeah, Mr. Hart, I know we've touched on it quite a bit, but I think it's important for people to understand, as both of you know, that if you make $750, you don't take home $750. And if you make $750 in a company, you end up paying a third out to taxes. You might take out $100 each or whatever you need to live in terms of your own, and then the balance stays in. The banks require it. Do you want to expand on that anything more? I know you've touched on it a couple of times, but I don't know that it can be touched on enough, because a lot of jobs are created through these pass-through entities, and when you put a floor in at $250 and you got 100 employees, and the banks are requiring more, and you're paying out a third of what you make, the taxes, that's not a great thing in terms of where we're at in terms of our country.
No, I'll simplify it and put it in the numbers. In Wisconsin this year, our capital budget is about $2.3 million. We have already hired 5 new apprentices in the spring. We hope to hire 5 new apprentices this year. And we have some open positions for engineers, et cetera, as we grow our business. Our profit projection for this year is about $2.4 million. So $2.4 million is going to go through personal tax returns as a pass-through entity. $2.3 million is going back into the business. I can't simplify it any further. You cannot look at this as just money going into our pockets, going into our clubs, whatever we say here. The overwhelming majority of small business profits goes back into the business. It's our livelihood. It's a future for hopefully our families and children. And again, I also support simplification, however, because we need to plan. We need to plan how to transition our businesses to the next generation, how to plan to grow our businesses. So simplification and transparency are very important.
It's uncanny. My numbers are almost exactly as his, almost exactly, and my salary isn't even $100,000.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dodson, you said it's complicated, and I would like to enter into the record an article from the National Journal called Guns and Stethoscopes.
Without objection.
In 1992, I had a memorable discussion with a manufacturer. He was the HR person from a major automobile company. And he said, you know, our costs, number one is steel, and number two is healthcare costs. And taxes is way down there somewhere. He said, I can look across the river into Windsor and see automobiles made for $2,000 less than they're made in the United States because of healthcare costs. He said, our our second biggest expenditure, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. So the president's been trying to deal with making manufacturing more competitive, and one of the things he did was come out with an Accountable Care Act. Now, I'd like to ask all the 6 of you who have companies, how many of you provide employees with health insurance?
Ford does.
3M does.
You can just put your hands up. All 6 of you do, right? How many of you support the effort at the Accountable Care Act to shift and make sure that everybody's in and try and get a hold of costs and get the free riders out of the system? How many of you supported it? Did Ford?
I'm not sure of the question, and I'm not a healthcare expert, but I think that Ford does not have to adjust much of anything in reaction to that act.
Okay.
Because of what we already do.
I'm the Vice President of Tax. I'm really not a specialist in healthcare, so really cannot comment on that. If there's anything that I can do after the hearing to get you an answer, I'd be happy.
Okay, let me get to the guys who are buying it for themselves. The 2 in the middle.
All I can say to you is our healthcare rep came in the other day and said he's seen the largest increases ever for healthcare for companies of our size. So if you ask me if I support that, I have to say no.
And that's different from last year? Last year you didn't have an increase?
We have increases all the time, but he says the increases are substantially higher coming.
And you?
Our planned increase for 2013 is over 12%. We spend over $12,000 per family and over $8,000 per single right now. There are certain provisions in reading the voluminous act that we can support, but overall, I think simplification is what we really support.
So what I hear you saying, all of you, is you in the corporate sector want to keep control of your own health care costs to your employees. You want to do it. You don't want any help from us. Is that right? That's not a cost item you worry about. I guess if you're going to hide behind the silo of being a tax person, I don't know how to deal with you, because it's so simplistic to come in here and talk about taxes as being the only issue that affects a company's profitability. The big issues are not taxes. They are these other personnel costs and material costs that when you buy something, you buy a machine, it's $250,000. I don't know where that ranks in terms of the costs in your company, in terms of the healthcare costs. What is your healthcare bill in comparison to that?
Our healthcare bill is rather substantive. It's a big part of what we do. I just mentioned the numbers per family and per individual.
What percentage is it of your expenses every year?
Approximately 10%.
How about next, Mr. Beck?
I don't know the number off the top of my head.
You don't know how much you spend on health care? You really don't?
No, I don't.
Wow.
But it's a substantial amount. There's definitely, and I would guess it's probably about 10%.
And how much are your taxes? What percent of your expenses go into taxes?
Well, it depends on whether we're losing money or making money.
So it could be nothing, but you still got to pay that 10% in health care.
You always have to, well, yeah, you have to pay that health care part. But, you know, oftentimes when the health care has gone up, we've had to shift some of that cost back into the individual because we couldn't cover it as a company.
When I listened to you, I thought it's very interesting you'd get involved with a guy from Germany. Germany's had a national health plan since 1883. And he comes over and he looks at your business and says to himself, why should I buy into this crazy healthcare system they have in the United States, which has no control? They're spending 12% of GDP on healthcare costs. We're spending 17%. and you don't have any control whatsoever. The rep comes in and says, here's what it's going to cost you next year. So what I have a hard time understanding is how taxes gets all the attention when nobody wants to talk about what happens in healthcare. It's like
time's
it's
expired.
because of taxes. It's not because of taxes we got problems in productivity.
I
quick
prepared
answer,
today
please.
for taxes. I didn't prepare today to talk about health care. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. Mr. Smith is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses today. I am wondering a little bit about temporary tax policies that we know abound, and certainly emphasis on the temporary nature. We have to renew them oftentimes on an annual basis. I was wondering if anyone of the businesses could reflect a little bit how you plan for that, whether it's a business plan from the beginning or how you plan for that for the future on the temporary nature of so many of these tax provisions.
Well, the problem is you really can't plan for it. Take the R&D credit, which is really the classic. We assume that eventually it will be renewed. It may or it may not be. But the fundamental question becomes, with that kind of uncertainty, how could it ever go into a business person's decision in making a decision? That's the fundamental problem. I can plan for it in my tax rate, but I can't recommend to a businessman to take it into account in making a business decision.
And so then the cost of compliance, I mean, that's slightly different, but certainly needs to be considered as well, given the complexity. Do you ever put an actual number to the cost of compliance?
Well, we're fortunate we are a cap audit taxpayer, and so we have reached agreements with the IRS as to how to compute the credit, how to compute the manufacturer's deduction. So our cost of compliance in those areas has gone down substantially. But before that, it was a very, very expensive proposition, both at the time of computing it and then also at the time when you had to discuss it with the IRS and, needless to say, have a controversy.
Okay, anyone else? Can you elaborate then on that process with the IRS that you went through?
The cap audit process? It is a program that was established, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago. Basically what it allows you to do is have a much more open relationship as a large corporation with the IRS. Through this process, we are current now in our audit. We are basically closed through 2010. Our requirement is to be much more transparent. We have to disclose all our transactions during the year as they occur. The IRS, on the other hand, their view is to get the audits done. So they don't bring up all these frivolous issues that they used to bring up. They bring up key issues. It's not like we don't have controversies. We still do have controversies. But when you think about it, 5 years ago, we had issues going back 10 years. That creates a lot of business uncertainty. Today, our 2010 audit is done. Think of the business certainty that creates. So I really applaud the IRS in this effort. This has been a wonderful process we've been involved in. The other companies we know of that are involved in it also think it's a very good process.
Mr. Hart, could you reflect on the temporary tax provisions and the cost of compliance?
I think the uncertainty, again, it weighs on a small business's mind more than anything else. You pick up the paper in the morning, you hear what's going on in Europe. You're not sure where your tax bill is going to be at the end of the year. Both of us in particular, and all of us, lived through the Great Recession a couple years ago and how we had to struggle to get through that. The uncertainty of the current code causes you to be cautious. It causes you to maybe not make that investment you'd like to make to see if you can make it pay off, but it causes you to be cautious. That's the biggest thing I can comment on.
Mr. Beck?
I think it's basically the same thing as what Mr. Hart said. I mean, I really can't elaborate on it much more other than if it's simplified and more stable, then we can plan further out. And as far as the R&D tax code, we've never taken an R&D tax code until we started this particular machine and started the R&D on it. A small company doesn't have ideas like this every day. Maybe in a larger company it might be used more often. But it did certainly play into our final decision whether or not the R&D tax code would help us alleviate some of the risk going forward. So I have to admit that in this particular case, it made sense for us. But overall, just knowing what the taxes would be and it's stable over a longer period of time certainly is helpful to small businesses.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of the witnesses for being here. Dr. Boucher, I grew up in Alabama, where we once had booming manufacturing industries. Most of the South did back then, but now the factories are gone, the jobs are gone, and left behind of hundreds and thousands of families who have struggled and continue to struggle to find their place in America's middle class. Can you repeat for the members of this committee why keeping manufacturing here in the United States is good policy for local community and families? And I want you to feel free to speak from your heart.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you. It's been just a very interesting hearing. There's a couple things on that. I mean, certainly manufacturing has traditionally provided solid middle-class jobs, and there's some new research by an economist, Susan Helper, from the Brookings Institution and her colleagues that shows that manufacturing workers are paid about 8% more even once you account for all of the characteristics of jobs in those workers. So even once you account for the fact that these are union workers, these workers are paid more than non-manufacturing workers. And the research has shown, and of course I'm not a business expert like all of you, but the research has shown that this is because those workers also have specific skills. So, which gets to the second reason why manufacturing is vitally important to our economy, which is one of the key sources of innovation. There's a lot of emerging economics research that is showing, and you from Corning talked about this, I think, very eloquently in your testimony and here today, that there is what economists call either industrial commons or other reasons why having different kinds of manufacturing together, both suppliers and the companies that they're working with, in one place creates innovation and vitality. And if our country wants to remain a leader in the world in terms of technology and innovation moving forward, making sure that we support that manufacturing base so that when you talked about the glass being very thin, needing to be near where the TV screens or whatever is being made, that's being done in Asia or wherever for a reason. We want those kinds of synergies to be happening here in the United States. So it's not just having one kind of manufacturing, but having that variety is very, very important and vital, and important if we want to remain a leader in terms of technology in the next century. And then finally, manufacturing plays a vitally important role in our macroeconomy. I mean, over the course of the recovery, manufacturing has been a leader in terms of job gains. It's been very good. That's been very encouraging to hear. But it's also vitally important for our trade deficit. Over the long term, this is something we're going to need to address, and if we don't start bringing manufacturing back into this country is one of the easiest ways we can address our trade deficit, and if we don't, we're going to have to continue to borrow from abroad, and eventually we'll have to pay that back. If we don't deal with this, we will be looking at a lower standard of living in the decades to come, and I would add that energy is a key component of this. As we both deal with rising energy costs in terms of oil that we're importing, and we are all looking for new ways to produce energy, green technologies, the extent to which we can do those here will be good for our trade deficit 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And then one just note, Congressman Smith, on your question about things about uncertainty, there's a lot of uncertainty right now about the extension of a number of the tax credits for and provisions for manufacturing in the green sector, including the production tax credit and the advanced energy manufacturing tax credit, which are causing a lot of uncertainty for particularly those manufacturers.
Dr. Boucher, and one member of the panel responding to our colleague, Mr. Johnson, said that you made it on your own, that you developed your own business. Now, don't we all live on this little piece of real estate we call America? And what about the roads, the bridges? Or what about the transit system? What about the clean water, the sewer system? Could you respond?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because this is of profound importance. I was reading the New York Times this morning, and there was an article on the cover of the paper about Stockton, California, which is about to go into bankruptcy, and talking about how They don't have any police. Murders have doubled. That there's this sort of this devastation in this American city, a lot of which is because they don't have tax revenues. And we've just lived here through in the District of Columbia, this massive power failure, hundreds of thousands of people without power for over a week because of a set of storms. That these are our nation's infrastructure. And if we don't have safe streets, if we don't have electricity that you can count on, if you don't have roads and bridges and all the things, and importantly, a public school system that can compete with the rest of the world, we will not be able to remain an economic powerhouse. If we do not educate the next generation that can create the kind of workforce that all of these companies benefit from, we will not be able to do that. So while any innovator and of course small business owners, they take an enormous amount of risk and enormous responsibility for moving their investment forward, but they do so because they can hire workers that have been educated in their community and because they can build on the infrastructure that's there. These are two pieces of the puzzle, and we need to think of them always simultaneously.
Thank you, Dr. Boucher.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Jenkins is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good hearing. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Hart and Mr. Beck, in your testimony, you both raised the issue of the impact of the estate tax and what the effect it has on family-owned businesses. Mr. Hart, in your testimony, you made the point that the primary reason for structuring a business as an S-corp is the hope that someday you can pass along that business to your children. Family-owned businesses, from farming and ranching families to family-owned manufacturing companies such as yours, deserve an opportunity to pass that business from generation to generation and in preserving these good-paying jobs in our communities. I believe families shouldn't be forced to sell their farm or their business to pay estate tax, so I'm a strong supporter of a full repeal of the estate tax. But I was wondering if you could each comment or tell me personally how the estate tax has affected your business and your decision-making, and what recommendations might you have for members of the committee on how we could treat the estate tax in any tax reform proposal. Mr.
Well, because the changes in the estate tax, and sometimes this becomes more advantageous. It depends on when you die, and I can't plan on when I'm going out, and so an estate tax, whatever we do on that, needs to be pretty well set so that you can have something to plan around, because ultimately maybe one year you get to a point where you can't plan for how much cash you'd have to generate to keep it in your family. I think that's the biggest fear that a lot of family-owned companies have, is how do you pay that tax burden? And do you start saving for that tax burden out of everything else we're trying to do? When we're trying to buy machinery, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. How do you finance it if you come to a point where you have a tax burden to try to keep it into your family? Let me tell you, from the standpoint of a family-owned business, I'm not saying that large companies don't treat their people well, because they do treat them well, but there certainly is a closeness that we have in our company on how important it is that our people are successful. When our people took 40% pay cuts because we were trying to survive, I was worried about those people, that they couldn't pay their mortgages on their homes and that they were going to lose their homes. And they stuck by us through that whole thing. And I truly believe that family-owned businesses have a very much closeness to their employees and really feel how they can try to help their employees. And when oftentimes you have to sell your business, it's sold to a bigger company, and then when business gets bad, they just close them up and they consolidate them down. And that's what happens if you can't keep it into your family. So I think estate tax planning and I think estate taxes are very critical for keeping these businesses for a long term and protecting the employees, protecting companies, small companies and communities where that tax revenue can be made. And I also want to say is, when it comes to infrastructure, I paid a lot of taxes for infrastructure. I think I paid my fair share, and I do believe we all as companies pay our fair share in infrastructure. We're part of the infrastructure of this country because we pay taxes to support it.
Mm-hmm.
I got a little off.
I totally agree, Mr. Hart.
I want to follow up on the infrastructure thing, too. I mean, after coming through the Great Recession, I'm glad to pay taxes. Those weren't fun years. Anyway, the issue of estate planning is very important. And again, I'm going to put the tone on it as a manufacturer. A manufacturer has to put a lot of capital back into the business. So a lot of us are faced with state taxes, whether uncertain or certain, with the decision if we can't put enough money back into the business because we have a huge estate tax liability to pay for, then it results in almost an inevitable sale. And we have many second and third generation workers working within our business, just as we have 4 family generations. So from a manufacturing standpoint, when you have to invest so much capital back into your business, an uncertain estate tax or the ability to plan for such does result in a sale too often a time, and usually it's not good for the business.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thompson's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all the witnesses who are here today. I appreciate you coming in and appreciate what you do and what your companies do and all of your employees. It's very important to our economy and it's very important to our country. And I don't think I speak for myself when I say that I want to do all that I can to help make sure that business in America is successful. It's important to the entire country and to our future. And I think tax reform is a very, very big part of that. But I do want to say that tax reform has got to be smart. It's got to be smart, and it's got to do a couple of other things. It's got to keep jobs in America, and it's got to bring jobs back to America. It needs to be revenue neutral, and as one of the witnesses said, it needs to pay the freight. It needs to pay the bills on everything that our country does. I think Mr. Lewis was very specific on those issues, and the sewer systems, the highways, et cetera. And I don't think we can just pick a number out of the air to say that's what the corporate rate should be. And the 25% number has become the kind of number of the week or the month. And I was very interested in when all of you who own and run businesses talked about what should be on the table to get to 25%. This is the second hearing similar to this that we've had. The last one, I don't remember all of the witnesses, but I know Caterpillar was here, a couple of the big corporations, and they were all very specific. They said almost to a person, take all of the other tax expenditures away, just get us down to a number, and that's was about the 25% number, I think. I understand that from the people that advise us that you can't get to revenue neutral at 25%, even if you get rid of all of the tax expenditures. It gets you down to about 28%. So if you do that, you can't just put it on the table. You got to pay for it. If you don't pay for it, we're in a bigger soup than when we started. I think, Mr. Beck, you talked about that. You talked specifically about how you were able to pull through this recession because you had very little debt and that you were fiscally responsible. And I think that's an important takeaway for us because we have to be fiscally responsible as well. And fiscally responsible means that we pick up the tab, or at least part of the tab, for education, because you can't educate your own workers. We pay for a Navy that keeps the shipping lanes open, that allow you to move your product overseas. A Coast Guard that responds to emergencies on the water. The medical professionals that Mr. McDermott talked about, the infrastructure that's so critically important to your companies. The Secretary Geithner was in before this committee and told us that the infrastructure problems we have is a hidden tax on the very people that are before us today testifying, and I think we all know that, and that's not helping your business either. I also want to mention that the American job stuff is critically important, and it's not all going overseas. As a matter of fact, we're seeing a change in that. A lot of it's coming back. I visited with a person just last week in my district who is seeing his business grow by about, I think, 18% per year. And he's a supplier to one company. He makes stuff for snowmobiles and ATVs. And his growth is because they're not making their components in China anymore. because they have huge costs for quality control. They have to send somebody over there to make sure that it's done correctly, and the cost of shipping stuff back and forth is extremely expensive. They're better off making it factory pipe in Ukiah, California. And it's I think, a prime example of the sort of thing that we need to figure out how to make that more prosperous, so you and your colleagues can continue to grow jobs overseas. But I think we need to be honest and fair about it. We can't just pick numbers out of the air. We need to do it in a way that balances the books and is able to pay for the things that allow all of you to run the companies that you run so well today. So I hope we can get to that, and I hope we can have a good discussion on that, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Marchin's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent a district that basically surrounds the DFW airport. So I have a very small geographical district. So when you land at DFW airport and you begin to drive through my district, you see the corporate headquarters of not Ford, but companies like Exxon and Fluor and these multinational, and you begin to get the impression that this is the main driver, business driver in my district. But the truth is, it is the small manufacturing companies that have gravitated there near the airport, near the multinational companies, that are there basically to serve the needs of, to supply these larger companies. When you begin to talk about taxing incomes over $250,000 at a higher rate, you're not talking about really taxing the large multinational companies. You're talking about taxing those small manufacturing companies who rely totally on retained earnings to fund their equipment purchases, your grinder, to fund new jobs being created, the 3 positions that will operate that grinder, and you're talking about the physical expansion of their plant facilities. All of these companies use their retained earnings to do that. If you raise the tax on those retained earnings, additional 5 or 6%, that the direct result of that there will be 5 or 6% less money put into facilities, equipment, and new job creation. So it has a very detrimental effect on it. And it's really to the advantage of the big companies who rely very heavily now on just-in-time inventory, rely on the efficiency of the smaller manufacturing and the smaller and mid-sized companies that are out there that are providing all this. So I believe if you begin to target what I would call the job creators in any kind of a tax reform or any kind of a tax extension, that you will eventually end up driving costs higher at the large company level. Now that's my comment. My question to all the companies here is, since an increasing number of targeted business tax expenditures are enacted on a temporary basis, is there greater value in a permanent tax rate reduction than these temporary benefits that must be renewed by Congress every year or so? And I'll start with Ms. Dawson.
I think that's undeniable. It would be far better to have a stable system that would inform good decision-making. That's what we would hope for.
Thank you. Just one word, absolutely.
I would agree. I think the temporary provisions are particularly painful. Corning in particular benefits from the look-through as well as the R&D credit, and having those bounce temporarily is very troublesome.
Again, uncertainty, I think I've used the word about 10 times so far. It makes it very difficult to plan when you have all the things on your mind as a small business. I believe in a stable, longer-term environment is what we all need. I would also, however, state that I also agree that if there's anything that can be retained or implemented to encourage investment in our country, to encouraging people to get into manufacturing, stay in manufacturing, should be considered.
I just think a stable tax is the best tax. I probably lean more a little bit the other way. If you had a lower tax and you had to give up some of these other things, at least we know the playing field that we're playing on. But the other opportunities of faster depreciation and R&D tax credits, those certainly are incentives for manufacturers, and we certainly appreciate those opportunities to do that. But at what cost, how it comes out in the committee, you know, I think the stability to me is still the most important thing.
In a capital-intensive business like ours, where it takes typically 2 to 3 years to build a plant, understanding what the tax result will be when the plant is finally placed in service 2 or 3 years down the road, and the predictability of that is a huge advantage and a game changer, I think.
I'd like to point you to a couple of citations in my testimony about what lowering the rate in a revenue-neutral way would do to a variety of industries. So that would lead to the elimination of many of these deductions, and there's some work by an economist named Martin Sullivan who showed that if you reduce the rate in a revenue-neutral way, this would be most detrimental overall to domestic manufacturing in his analysis, and that the biggest winners would be securities, who would see a net reduction of 12.3%, insurance, credit intermediation, and retail trade and bank holdings, so that reducing the rate overall but eliminating these deductions would primarily go to finance and retail, while overall it would mean a net in aggregate increase for manufacturing, and in particular computers and electronics would see the largest increase in their taxes under that proposal. So I do think that it seems to be there are some concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Blumenauer is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would hope just a question to Mr. Beck and Mr. Spinks at some point, not now, but if I could just get a one-page explanation about the reinvestment in the business. You were talking about the uptick in the tax rate would be a disincentive for you to invest in the business. And my understanding is that in many instances the reinvestment is a deductible expense. And so if you could just explain on one page at some point, we don't have time to go into it now, and I'm probably not smart enough to understand it, if you could explain to me whether or not these are deductible expenses and how that works for your enterprise. I'm sorry my friend Mr. Davis is not here because he talked about the negative consequences of employment when the Clinton tax increases were put in effect. Because if memory serves, the 8 years of the Clinton administration, there were something like 22 million jobs created versus less than a tenth of that during the 8 years of the Bush administration, with 2 rounds of tax reductions. But I appreciate the range of discussions that are here, because I think there's no question but what, as a result of hearings we've had and conversations we all have, that the tax system is broken. And the focus on manufacturing is important, because as I look at the manufacturers that I represent, they are some who manufacture in the United States. They are some of the few people who actually pay that statutory rate. As you know, that top statutory rate is not what most businesses pay. The average is much less than that, but it's manufacturing in the United States that gets hammered. And so you're helping us focus on that and think about how we protect that and move forward, I think is very, very important. I appreciate what my colleague, Mr. Thompson, talked about in terms of how we go forward and how we're balanced. Because despite all the rhetoric, we are collecting less in tax as a percentage of our gross national product than any time since Truman was president. So tax collections are down in the aggregate. we have a growing and aging population. Something's got to give. We want to help manufacturing. We have a system that is not particularly rational, but it seems to me we need to be able to look at the big picture. I was intrigued, the reference to Germany. Germany has a total corporate hit of somewhere in the neighborhood of 49% when you look at all the business costs in. When you look at the amount of money that governments collect from business, the United States is 27.3 of total revenue that come from business. The average of the OECD is 36.2%. So these collect more from business, and they have, almost without exception, much higher personal income tax rates. So if we're going to undertake a change and pay our bills, and not much less deal with what has been referenced, this infrastructure deficit, we got to figure out how to get about this. One of the differences is all those companies, all these countries we're competing with, have a value-added tax along with the territorial system. So they make up the gap by having a substantial revenue flow. And again, there isn't time, and I don't want to trap anybody, but I would hope that if any of you have some thoughts about how a value-added tax would fit into long-term, we would welcome that. And if you've got super policy people or you just have some random thoughts, I spend a lot of time on airplanes going back and forth every week to Oregon. And so in addition to reading your testimony, I would really love if you have some thoughts about how a value-added tax might fit into this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Reed's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Ford, if we could spend a little time together here, I wanted to explore a little bit more in detail your comments that you offered on the transition rules, because one thing that I've come to the conclusion, and I'm glad to be at this conclusion, is that it's not a question of if we're going to do comprehensive tax reform, it's a question of when. So in order to prepare for that, I would like to have a little bit more of your comments and detail on the issues dealing with transition and transition rules, and what are the pros and cons that you could offer us? What should we be focusing on?
Certainly, I think there are pros and cons to the general concept that in order to go to a territorial system, we have to treat the cumulative foreign earnings that have existed to date in a certain way. I think the current proposal that Chairman Camp has put forward is that all of the earnings that have accumulated abroad would be taxed immediately prior to the transition, and that they would be taxed at a reduced rate. I think obviously the pros there are for companies trying to compete is that the reduction in rate helps reduce the overall liability. I think the concerns are that all of the cumulative earnings are not necessarily in the form of cash. And so to some extent there's a disparity between the actual money we could bring home under that and the amount that we would be taxed on. So I think that's a major concern. I think some of the things that can help address that concern are the permission to use carryover losses and foreign tax credits that have accrued over time to reduce that cash liability. I think allowing it to be paid over time is helpful, and maybe some indication or agreement to limit the amount that is subject to tax to the extent there's a very huge disparity between the cash available and the actual earnings.
So as a small business owner, that was always something that was so important to me, is that cash is king. And if those bills are due, and you got to have the resources to pay for it. So I appreciate that. And then on option C, you mentioned it as part of the base erosion protection issues. Can you also get a little bit more in detail what the pros and cons of pursuing that option would be?
I think one of the common themes that applies to any tax reform is that the devil is always in the details. I don't think there's anyone on the panel that will disagree with me there. I think the biggest concern with respect to option C is how broad that base becomes. The reduction in the tax rate on income from intangibles is, of course, very helpful. It's competitive compared to compared to some of what our competitors enjoy. But I think the biggest concern is how will that base be defined? To the extent that there is foreign source income or foreign source intangible income in foreign locations, the challenge is how much of that would be brought in to be subject to this tax. I think that's the greatest concern.
Appreciate that. And Mr. Gersel, do you have any comments on option C, getting in particular the pros and cons of what's being proposed, and can you offer some insight from 3M's perspective?
Well, 3M historically has had virtually 100% of its IP here in the U.S. The only IP that's actually offshore is an IP that we might have acquired in acquisition, and it's simply too expensive to move back here. So any type of option that would go after some of the abuses that do exist with IP offshore, I think would be welcomed by me. At the same time, I think we do need a kind of a carrot and stick approach, and that is the carrot approach is why would we not do more to encourage research and development here in the U.S. and IP ownership here in the U.S. We spend $1.6 billion each year on R&D. Our R&D credit is $20 million. Obviously, that's not going to change a whole lot of minds in terms of where we invest. But if we did something like the patent box, which is becoming quite common in Europe, as a carrot, you might see a fundamental change in the way IP is developed and owned by U.S. companies.
And why is that so important to keep that IP here in America?
Well, I mean, certainly the patent protection, and I'm not a patent lawyer, so I can't address it in detail, but certainly the patent protection of having the IP here. The fact that where the IP is also going to encourage where it's developed. For 3M, our fundamental innovation is in the U.S., is in St. Paul. 32% of our products that we're selling this year have been developed in the last 5 years. We want to keep that innovation here in the U.S. We do have labs offshore. That's a necessity of our business also, but we want to keep the base innovation here.
And with that base innovation, I would assume the jobs that are associated with it, like in Corning, my hometown of Corning, those are typically your research scientists, your engineers, and others. Is that correct?
Correct. And then obviously a successful company adds to the headquarters staff. 50% of our manufacturing is here. And to be perfectly honest, if you look at some of the really innovative stuff that we have, for instance, we've revolutionized the abrasives industry over the last 5 years. That technology is not going anywhere. We're going to keep it here. We're going to make it here. That's simply not technology we're going to readily put offshore. Other technologies, however, that are older and then less IP protected, that certainly manufacturing ends up offshore because we're a short cycle supplier. Our customers are demanding that we be close to them, very much like the Corning example.
And I appreciate, I know my time has expired, and with that IP being here, I always keep the hope out that manufacturing would then blossom next to that IP center here in America. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Kynes recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank our panelists for your testimony here today. It is helpful, and we have been hearing countless hearings throughout the year on what comprehensive tax reform should entail. So getting this feedback, I think, is very beneficial. But unless or until, and I've made this point in previous hearings, unless we start putting something in draft, putting something on paper, we're all dealing in the 30,000-foot theoretical level. Because we all know that at the end of the day, and the chairman knows this and every member of the committee knows this, once you put something on paper, you're immediately going to be creating winners and losers, no matter what we do, which is going to make reform very, very difficult. And that's why we're going to be asking you to do some pretty hard calculations, those of you who are representatives of the manufacturing sector of this country, of what you are willing to live with and what you're willing to give up for the sake of a shared goal of trying to lower rates, broaden the base, and simplify, simplify, and simplify. Now, we're getting contradictory messages from some of you witnesses here today, where you're telling us, not all of you, and Mr. Gersel, we had a nice conversation about this, and 3M was, you were clear with me yesterday, and you were clear in your testimony today, that you're willing to give up a lot of the expenditures that you currently take for the sake of a lower rate, and I appreciate that. But you can't have both. And we're hearing from some of you that you'd like lower rates, but you'd also like to keep R&D, you'd like to keep depreciation, you'd like to keep 199. And that's the concern that I have, because the goal of trying to get to 25%, the Congressional Budget Office already told us that in order to try to get there, we have to take away every tax expenditure that exists on the seaside. And even then, the best we can do is get to 28. So if the goal is really to get to 25, then somehow you're going to have to supplant that lost revenue and dip into the pass-through side. So Mr. Hart, Mr. Beck, that's when your ears perk up, as they should, in a hurry. Because I don't think you're going to be willing to be paying more as a pass-through entity for the sake of C Corps getting a lower 25% rate, if we're going to do this in a deficit-neutral fashion. And yet most of the expenditures that are talked about being eliminated are the ones that directly benefit manufacturing. And Dr. Boucher, I want to ask your opinion in a second of what the impact would be on the manufacturing sector of our economy if we do take away R&D, if we do take away depreciation, we do take away 199 for the sake of lowering the rates and broadening the base. Because I happen to believe that a country as great as ours, we have to have the ability to make things and to produce things and to invent things and create things and grow things, or we are no longer going to be a superpower in this world. And therefore, I think there'd be more interest on this committee of what type of changes we have to make in the tax code that would benefit companies such as yours that make things and invent things and create things here in the United States of America. And that's why earlier this year I introduced legislation called Promoting American Manufacturing Act, which calls for reducing the manufacturing rate from 35 to 20 for those that make things, for those manufacturers of our country. And we're not going to be able to do that for every industry, for every sector of our economy. But what's being pitted right now against each other are basically your manufacturers in your technology sector versus everyone else, from the retailers, the wholesalers, financial corporations, the service sectors, who are paying a high rate right now, but they're not getting these deductions. They'd love to have a lower rate. But in order to get there, you're going to be taking away a lot of the expenditures that directly benefit manufacturers in the process. And we need help in trying to figure this out. And you guys are going to have to make those hard calculations of what you're willing to live with for the sake of lower rates, what you're willing to give up. But maybe, Dr. Boucher, ask you first, and then Mr. Hart, I want to go back to you to get your perspective on this too. But what do you think would be the impact on domestic manufacturing if we take those expenditures off that directly benefit manufacturing in the high-tech sector today, just for the sake of lowering rates for everyone?
Well, from where I sit, looking at the big picture as an economist, it seems like that would be bad for U.S. manufacturing. And we already have an industry that certainly has been in trouble. We've seen a decline in many ways in manufacturing employment and as a share of GDP. And I think it should be a national goal to make sure that manufacturing remains a vital part of our economy and grow it. And so these kinds of tax expenditures that seem very important to manufacturing should not be done at the expense of lowering the rate, when the lowering of the rate, at least according to all of the analysis, if you did that in a revenue neutral way, would disproportionately benefit other industries like finance and insurance and retail, which while are of course, certainly important, don't have the pivotal place that manufacturing plays, both in terms of job creation, but also as a key sector for innovation.
Dr. Boucher, not to sound too crass in my analysis, and listen, I'm holding myself out as an expert, but if you take a look at the manufacturing and tech sectors, these jobs are highly mobile. You guys can go anywhere around the globe where it makes sense for you to do it. But you look at the other sectors, retailers, wholesalers, financials, the service sectors, they're less mobile. I mean, where are they going to go? They got to stay here in the United States, provide jobs here, because this is where the customer base is.
Not only are they
Time has
less
expired, so if you just could be brief.
Okay, not only are they less mobile, but they don't create the same kind of innovation effects that are so critical for us remaining the sort of the economic powerhouse that we've been.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I would just say, Mr. Kind, that tax expenditure report you mentioned is incomplete. It does not include all of the tax expenditures, and it is not necessary to get rid of every tax expenditure in order to get to 25. So Mr. Brady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Chairman, thanks for hosting in this hearing. We are hearing from iconic American companies, and to top it off, we have a company headquartered in Texas. So it doesn't get any better than this panel. Clearly, if America wants to have the strongest economy in the world for the next 100 years, we have to get our tax code right. Today, despite what you see on the campaign trail, there aren't incentives in the tax code to send jobs overseas. The tax code itself is the problem, making it harder to locate jobs, especially manufacturing jobs here in America. The Ways and Means Committee, led by Chairman Camp, had last fall laid out a draft proposal to make us competitive again, both lowering the rate, moving to a territorial system to make sure we're not out of sync with the rest of America, allowing companies both to compete overseas and to bring those profits back to invest in America. The President has, in a less specific way, outlined some general approaches. He too wants to lower the rate, which I commend. But he keeps in place, or at least the White House keeps in place, the territorial system, the outdated system we have today. In fact, even removes some of the provisions that would create double taxation risks for companies. Looking at those two approaches, the draft that's been laid out by this committee and from the White House, I want to start with our business witnesses. From a competitive standpoint, both competing around the world and competition you face here in America, do you have a preference in which concept, which direction allows you to compete best going forward?
My written testimony, and I think my oral today, said Ford does not have a particular position. We think a variety of different approaches could work.
So may I ask, so a territorial, you have no problem leaving the territorial system in place?
With some
The
very
worldwide
strong,
system in place?
Well, I mean, we've been working with that for some years. To us, the low U.S. tax rate is the single most powerful thing. And because of our profile, because of where we historically have operated near our customers, our profile does not suggest to us a leaning strongly one way or the other. But if it's territorial, anti-base erosion provisions are really important.
Okay.
We clearly support the chairman's proposal, at least the outline of the chairman's proposal. As far as a lower rate is concerned, with the base broadening, we create a more even playing field here in the United States and make the U.S. more competitive internationally. Territoriality is really a separate issue. It's what will enable us to compete with our foreign competitors. So both are really important. One does not go without the other. But clearly the chairman's proposal would be our preference.
Thank you.
I think our preference would also be to shift more towards a territorial system because so many of our competitors and customers are located internationally, and those companies have territorial systems that leaves it as an unfair advantage. We do spend some time when we look at expenses in the U.S., funding our R&D, funding our corporate headquarters. We do spend a lot of time analyzing, is it actually cheaper to borrow in the U.S. to fund those activities instead of bring money home that we already own? So I think it's a significant issue for companies like Corning, and territorial would be help us to be more competitive.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Hall?
Well, the territorial doesn't really impact us being domestic manufacturers. One point to Mr. Kind, there is an exhibit in my testimony on a tax template, how the tax changes would specifically impact pass-through manufacturers. So that is in my testimony for the review. Again, I have to state that the stability in the tax code and the ability, we're a capital-intensive business, and that's what we have to remember here. We're a capital-intensive business. So we need profits to reinvest in our businesses. We need profits to leave in our businesses in order to borrow money. So an overall effective tax rate will clearly allow us to do that. However, I continue to encourage the fact that since we are a capital-intensive business, if there's anything to be retained to assist with those incentives, it's for the best of all of us.
And can I make a point there? I think this is a healthy discussion, one we've wanted to have for a long time. The reason we've held almost 20 hearings on this issue, having a discussion about the lowest rate possible, a pro-growth tax code, the cost of capital and the impact. This is all part of getting to, I think, the best tax code we can create for our companies. So thanks for that discussion.
Well, real quick, manufacturing capital investment isn't just about us. I mean, I have 120 suppliers to me. We have service businesses in our community that respond to our capital investment.
Got it, Mr. Hart. Can I hear real quickly Mr. Beck and Mr. Spinks?
Real quick, because time's expired.
The territorial doesn't affect us either, but going back to accelerated depreciation, talked about that. I've been in this business and running it for 35 years. I bought machinery where we didn't have accelerated depreciation, and I bought machinery where we've had it. When you have it, it's certainly it may be an incentive to make a decision that you may not make ordinarily because you have that advantage. It certainly can help when the economy isn't good.
Good.
But I've lived under both.
Thanks, Mr. Beck. I've run out of time. Mr. Spinks.
Thank you. Mr. Neal's recognized.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciated Mr. Brady's emphasis on the lowest possible corporate tax rate. Mr. Jessel, would you comment on the idea of if you had the option of a 27% rate or giving up R&D, which one would it be?
For the R&D credit versus 27%?
Yeah.
Well, 27%.
27%. We'd be assured that you'd never have anybody come back looking for the R&D afterwards?
Well, I mean, right now in its current form, it's such a small number that it really doesn't affect our decision-making process, no.
It's a big issue in Massachusetts, to be very
Sure.
frank, as you might expect.
And obviously,
Yeah.
every corporation is in a different position.
Right, and we've had these conversations back and forth, and I appreciate the testimony. It's really very, very helpful. The problem is, at this stage of the question and answer period, every question's either been asked or exhausted. So what's the, after the issue of taxation, what for manufacturers is the next big issue? And any member of the panel?
Well, if I could, I've noticed today that there's violent agreement to do something, and that's really encouraging. The problem is what we do has to recognize that we're now in a global economy, and a global economy that's in a globe that's becoming smaller and smaller every day. We can't look at the past as to how we might do manufacturing. We have to look at the future as to how we might do manufacturing and where can the U.S. succeed. Everyone wants the U.S. to succeed, there's no doubt about that. But you have to go overseas and see what's going on in other places to see how much we have to learn how to compete in this economy.
And the other panelists, what other considerations would you have just besides the issue of taxes?
Definitely skilled workforce is very important to us. You take skilled and talented employees to innovate.
Are we falling down on that front?
Yeah, to be very honest, we usually have to take young apprentices and send them to community colleges for basic skills in mathematics and everything else just to get them into our apprenticeship programs. We're falling down a little bit on the basics.
Okay. The other panelists?
To be honest, I think as an internationally headquartered company, we still see the United States as probably the premier place in the world to do business. But when we compare the tax rates that we see in other industrialized countries to the United States, there's a serious disadvantage here.
Okay. Ms. Boucher?
I'd like to direct your attention. There was an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that talks about a number of firms that are insourcing back, inshoring back to the United States, and they cite a number of examples for why they're doing it. Some of it has to do with patent protection, some of it has to do with education and a skilled workforce, but there's a long list of things that's not just about taxes that are very. I'll get this to you.
I saw the article, and you gave me the run-up. Are any of the panelists, are you considering bringing jobs back right now for those of you who have international interests?
I think as a general rule, our view is if we grow internationally, we grow domestically as well. I think even since the recession, I think we added about 1,500 jobs in China because many of our businesses sell to Chinese markets, and we added 2,000 in the U.S. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think we continue to add in both.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Mr. Hart?
We've added jobs back, and again, exports are a big part of our business, 22% overseas. So, international and globalization is part of what we have to deal with every day.
Okay. Mr. Jersall?
Well, as a short-cycle material supplier, if our customers come back to the U.S., we'll be coming back to the U.S.
Any immediate plans to?
We're not seeing that great of an increase in U.S. manufacturing at this point in terms of our customers, but as I say, when they do come back, we'll be right next to them.
Okay. Ms. Dawson?
Well, we locate where our customers are, so I will just channel Alan Mullally and say profitable growth for all is what we want for all parts of the world, so U.S. included.
Okay. Just a last comment, Mr. Chairman. One of the frequent concerns that I hear from the manufacturers where I live, it really is the issue of skills. I hear it all of the time, and the fact that they are subsidizing additional education, remedial education, and then on to the community college, which is a very important part of the economic discussion in America. But it is a frequent topic of discussion now. And again, particularly with the high-end manufacturers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is an issue, and obviously that's something the Ed and Workforce Committee and Chairman Klein are obviously trying to address. And this committee's general focus is tax policy and tax issues, but understanding there are a variety of issues that affect the ability of our businesses to compete and grow and create jobs. But at this time, I'll recognize Mr. Schock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm specifically interested in the several small business owners that are represented on the panel here today. Are you guys aware of the President's comment this past week about business owners? And if so, I'm just curious your perspective.
Yes, I am. It's interesting. I talked to a number of small business owners, and they weren't, needless to say, very happy. And they said, I'm sure glad you're going to speak to the House Ways and Means Committee because you won't use any uncivil swear words in front of them, but we would because of the feelings that the small business people have back in our communities about those types of words, that were about what he had said. And I said, there's people that are really upset.
Anyone else wish to comment? I'm just curious because I will tell you, as an entrepreneur before I came to Congress, maybe I was foolish to think that it was my hard work that helped me be successful and the businesses that I'd worked in that I thought I was building. But I know some of you are a little bit older than I am and perhaps been in business longer than I was, and thought maybe I'd like to get your perspective because I found them very spellbinding when I read them first and then saw them, that as we talk about jobs, we talk about a president with a record of unemployment for the longest period of consistency in my lifetime, and we're all throwing up our hands here in Washington, D.C., wondering why people won't hire, and the commander-in-chief, the leader of the free world, says things like, if you built a business, if you have a successful business, you didn't build it, somebody else did. Somebody else made that happen.
Every one of us want to see our business grow. Every one of us want to be profitable. Every one of us, when we're profitable, we pay taxes. When we pay taxes, we pay for the infrastructure. We're part of the infrastructure of this country.
I just thought
That's how the
perhaps
country
you had
moves
a perspective on who made you guys successful, if it wasn't, in fact, you and your people.
I think my colleague over here had already said it. We along with our team and those that are people that work with us each day have made our company successful. And we've never asked for a penny from anybody, and we've paid our fair share in taxes. When I went from 110 people down to 25, I couldn't ask for a government bailout. There were no loans that were going to keep my doors open. We had to figure it out ourselves. And our people took great sacrifice in salaries and worked really hard to help pull the company back out of the hole. And we are now seeing some really strength in our company as we've come back from it. But we would never have received any help from any place. We would have just gone away. We're only 110 people. We would have just gone away.
Well, as one elected official, I want to say thank you because I believe you guys are the ones who create jobs, and I believe that you are successful as businesses because of your work ethic, your ability to take risk, your willingness to put in the time, talent, energy necessary to do so. So know that there are some of us on Capitol Hill who recognize why small businesses and entrepreneurs are successful. With that, I want to ask some specifics on tax reform as it's related to manufacturers. I'm curious if anybody up here represented, small or large, currently utilize LIFO in their accounting practices. Ms. Doslin, could you maybe please speak to this? Because I know we've had scores of businesses, small and large, come to my office, and we've had testimony here from big companies, small companies, and most of them say what you have said, which is get rid of the credits, get rid of the deductions. I know Caterpillar, which is in my hometown, have said, look, we'll give up R&D even though we use it, get us down to 25%, and we'll give it all up. LIFO seems to be one that, because of its retroactivity in terms of the tax collection, it's not moving forward, that has the potential to really put some businesses out of business. And I'm just curious to what degree it would affect you if LIFO was repealed moving forward, but also the retroactivity in terms of the liability it would mean for you. Have you guys looked at that?
We have, but you'll notice it was not part of my testimony because it wouldn't have been effective for me to come here and say I want a lower rate and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? So I didn't list it as one. It will be painful to lose it, but I think the degree of pain is not what you hear from some others.
would you agree that it's important for us to try and when eliminating deductions, accounting practices, whatever we want to call them, that we do it moving proactively and that we limit what is retroactive? In other words, I would
Well-
assume if we tried to get back all of the depreciation retroactively that bonus depreciation has awarded over the last couple of years, there might be some screaming and gnashing of teeth if we try to do that. LIFO seems to me to be a similar mechanism where going forward is one discussion, proactive, but retroactivity seems a lot more harmful.
Well,
And
once,
time has expired, so if you could just answer as fast as you can.
I'll just say, once you have the bones of an idea of a tax package, transition rules are going to be really important, and you won't want to cause harm in the transition.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Pascrell.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we're now 19 months into this Congress. We have yet to see any comprehensive jobs agenda, let alone a comprehensive manufacturing plan. We've already established, I think, reestablished today, that while we complain about regulations and taxes, they apparently were not the cause of what happened beginning in 2006 into the manufacturing sector going back 20 years. What concerns me is that from January 2000 to January 2010, the United States of America lost 5.5 million manufacturing jobs. In my home state of New Jersey, we lost 11% of our manufacturing base. A recent study by Alan Blinder and Alan Kruger, who is the chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, has shown 1/4 of American jobs, this is what really concerns me, are potentially offshoreable, with 80% or over 600,000 of these jobs in manufacturing. That's almost 150,000 manufacturing jobs in New Jersey, 300,000 in Michigan, over 500,000 in Texas, and 365,000 in Ohio. The light of our economic recovery is powered by domestic production. You are right. Over the past 2 years, the manufacturing sector has added 400,000 jobs. Who would have thought 2 years ago that this would be the lead factor in getting the economy, starting to get the economy back on its feet? The first period of sustained growth since the 1990s. We need to enact policies to keep up the momentum, and that's why you gentlemen and ladies are here today. The recently released nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office report entitled Fiscal Policy Options for Increasing Economic Growth and Employment in 2012 and 2013 has made it clear that what we can be doing is reducing the cost of adding employees and investing. Those are two things that are available to us if we have the courage to do that. Yet we have great legislation to do just that. We've been unable to move it, including bipartisan legislation with the 100% expensing for capital expenditures. To me, that's a no-brainer. I think it's a no-brainer to all of you. Today, the Senate will block action on legislation that I've introduced, the Bring Jobs Home Act, aimed at lowering the cost for companies looking to insource jobs back to America. Ms. Boucher, I've even had to battle some in my own party about my belief that manufacturing provides a substantial economic impact. Can you elaborate on how it helps drive our economy in your eyes?
Well, it drives it in a number of ways. I mean, looking immediately at the short term, certainly manufacturing as a sector has one of the biggest multipliers of other industries. So when you create a job in manufacturing, you create many more other jobs in other sectors than you do if you create a retail or a service sector job. So certainly in the short term, the fact that the recovery has been led by gains in manufacturing has certainly been something that's been optimistic, that certainly we could gain on. But second, I think that one of the key ways that manufacturing is vital for our economy is because manufacturing is where innovation happens. And so if we want to be the kind of economy that creates the next great inventions, we need to be the kind of economy that supports the kinds of sectors in our economy that employ engineers, that employ the innovators of the future. And manufacturing certainly does that. So it has both the big multiplier effect, it has the innovation effect, and I would just add that it is also critically important for our macroeconomy.
So we made a big mistake in listening to corporate America 30 years ago in moving towards a service economy while we've lost millions and millions of manufacturing jobs and really reviving the old Jefferson-Hamilton debate that we did not have to have a multifaceted economy. And Jefferson, the great hero of America, told us, let's keep on our path, and agriculture will see to the conclusion. Hamilton was correct. Can you compare how the 20% tax credit for insourcing and the Bring Jobs Home Act would help employment in the United States as opposed to proposals to exempt overseas profits from U.S. taxes?
That is a long question.
And if you could respond in writing, because time has expired, the committee would appreciate that. If you can give a few-second answer.
Thank you.
Certainly, I think it would be better to encourage firms to relocate to the United States than to stop taxing their ventures overseas. But I'll
You can elaborate in writing to the committee. Thank you. Mr. Berg is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you being here. I'm from North Dakota, and North Dakota, a long time, our manufacturing has been a core passion of mine. You know, I come out here, and our challenge as a country is, quite frankly, we need more revenue. And manufacturing, we always used to use the term primary sector. Manufacturing creates new wealth in America. I mean, and that is the core fundamental of our economy, and it's worked for a long time. I look at a lot of the rhetoric out here, and, you know, 95% of our consumers live outside of the United States. What we should be doing is not focused on worried about foreign competition as much as we should say, how can our manufacturers be that competitor in all these foreign markets? And very clearly, as you've talked today, we've heard about that. One question, Mr. Hart, I mean, obviously you don't have a lot of foreign, my understanding is you don't do much business outside of the United States.
We export to 15 different countries, about 22% of our sales. Yes.
So it's big, it's big.
Big part of our business.
My question really was, you know, even if there's companies that aren't exporting out of our country, they're still facing that foreign competition from their customers. They're making different choices. But let me just, I had a thought the other day, and we heard it today. And the thought is, your profit, you've got a partner that's taking 1/3 of your net profit. That partner is the federal government. They're not putting $1 of capital in, but kind of they're your partner. And what we're sitting here today, this is like a different board of directors for that silent partner. I'm just frustrated because the federal government should be doing everything it can do to help you increase your revenue, increase your profits, and I'm sitting here thinking you can't be for American manufacturing at the same time increase the cost on that manufacturing and increase the uncertainty on that manufacturing. You know, and that's kind of what we've heard over and over again. My question really gets down to, we're talking about a flatter, fairer tax, and we heard some comments that that's bad for manufacturing. I guess my question here is, if we go with a flat tax, flatter, fairer tax, 25 and 10% like we've talked, got rid of some of the exemptions, and not all the exemptions, there's some key ones that we've talked about, research, et cetera, but it was a net dollar equal, would your company do better in that environment? Would they make more money, which obviously the great comment about making $1.4 million and investing $1.3 back in capital. So I'd just like to ask the manufacturers here that question. If it was a flat tax or a flatter tax from what we've got, would that generate more revenue for your company?
I'll give you a quick answer, but I might have to think about that one a little bit, because I suspect what it would do is allow business decisions to be made on the basis of business factors more than tax factors, and we hope that's good everywhere we operate. So I think it's directionally correct.
devil's in the details, but rough math would tell me we'd do a lot better.
Similarly, we would also do better because our competitors are more international and their tax costs are much lower.
A stable, longer-term system would help us with better business decisions.
And it would be the same for us. If you normally make a decision based upon the business first and then the tax second.
I completely agree that a more competitive rate versus the other countries in the world would go a long way towards the real goal, which is to increase investment in the United States.
Well, again, I know, Ms. Boucher, you mentioned that report that said the exact opposite, and we're hearing from manufacturers, and I couldn't agree with you more. So anyway, this, along with some stability in your regulatory environment, I think would help American manufacturers be more competitive and would bring more manufacturing jobs in America. So thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. Mr. Crowley is recognized.
Thank the chairman. I'm going to get right to questioning. Ms. Dozen, would you agree that the U.S. manufacturing industry, and more specifically the U.S. auto industry, is in far better shape than it was on January 19, 2009?
I guess so, yes.
You would agree with that. I'd agree as well. I think that the deal that was worked out by Ford CEO Alan Mulally, as well as with President Obama, and working with Democrats here in the House on a rescue package for the U.S. auto industry, and it worked and literally saved millions of jobs and created new jobs in our economy. Would you, Ms. Dosen, Ford received a federal loan guarantee from the Department of Energy through the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program in the amount of $5.9 billion. The goal of the loan was to provide capital to the U.S. auto industry for the purposes of funding projects that help vehicles that are manufactured in the United States. Did this program benefit Ford and saved jobs here in the United States?
In my testimony, I talked about all of the things Ford did to restructure itself, and that included, completely overhauling a great deal of the business. And once we did that and reached a point of financial viability, we were in a position to go look for funding to accelerate the plan. And when we do that, we'll go to the lowest cost source of
So you would
funding,
agree that that
and
particular,
we did go to the government
that
for
that
those
particular loan program was
DOE loans, and it did support jobs in many facilities, probably over
Ms. Dosen,
30,000.
my time is very limited, so that specific loan program was beneficial to your company, was it not?
It was.
Thank you. So you'd agree that these loan programs are generally beneficial to job creation, would you not?
They were
Yes
a
or no?
good low-cost source of borrowing at the time.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Beck, if President Obama did not create a rescue package for the U.S. auto industry, a package championed and crafted with the support of Ford CEO Alan Mulally, where would your business be today?
Probably wouldn't be, well, I think Ford would have probably survived, and right now
Where would your business be today?
very good.
You'd be good if GE and, if Chrysler and GM had gone under.
Right now, most of my work is with Ford.
So you think that overall, do you think that Ford would have survived had the others gone down?
I think Ford would have survived.
I think many economists would disagree, including Mr. Mulally, who
I
was
just
from,
gave you my opinion.
it's my time, so I'm going to take it back, and I'm going to say that many economists would disagree with your position and would suggest that the entire industry would have collapsed, and therefore your business, had we taken the Romney approach of let Detroit go bankrupt, I think your business would have gone the way of the Studebaker. Finally, I just want to follow up on what my colleagues, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Schock, were talking about before in terms of interpreting what President Obama's comments on how no one is an island and America is a society, and so that behind every successful small business is another hand to help them get there. I'd like to think that I didn't get to Congress on my own, that the fact that my parents saw to it that I had the right kind of education helped along the way, that people who helped get me elected helped me get here as well. So people are ridiculing him because they're parsing the words, distorting his words, but I think the president was right. Mr. Hart, do you think that we as a nation, that we owe a debt of gratitude to our veterans? Do you think that you would be where you are today without the work and sacrifice of our veterans and the men and women who died to protect the interests of this country?
Yeah, clearly an important part of our society.
You would agree, would you not?
I
Important
agree.
part of our society, people dying to maintain our way of life is an important part of society. That's
correct.
That's the level of enthusiasm you give to that. Would you
I'm not
imply
here-
to?
I'm not here to political.
No, but
political
just
labels.
again, I'll reclaim my time. I'm surprised by the lack of fervency there. Do you think that we owe a debt to those individuals? Do you think that your company could have survived had America not survived? Had those soldiers failed in their attempt to maintain our way of life, our capitalist way of life?
In no way we could have survived.
I'm glad that you agree that your business would not have survived had those
You know,
sacrifices
Mr. Crowley,
not been made.
I have to
would-
say that this line of questioning is really not on topic.
Mr. Chairman, it is on topic.
You have a few seconds. Why don't you conclude?
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, Mr. Schock raised this point, and I'm clarifying the point Mr. Schock raised.
Complete your questioning.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. None of us would be here, none of us, without the patriotism and dedication and sacrifices of our veterans. So I urge all my colleagues to stop questioning the patriotism and dedication of our military, our veterans, and stop playing politics with the President's remarks.
The gentleman's time has
No
expired.
man or woman is an island.
The gentleman's time has
Thank you,
expired.
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman.
Black is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the panel for being here today. It's been a very good conversation on topic about our tax reform and the necessity for that, and I want to thank all of you, both the large companies and also the smaller companies. Having been a business owner who started a business, I can say that I know those challenges that we have. But I want to turn our attention to one area that has not really been explored fully, is to look at why foreign companies invest in the United States. And we know that nearly 40% of all those foreign direct investments by global companies into the United States are connected to manufacturing, which the statistics show directly translate into about 2 million jobs, which is pretty important. Mr. Spinks, probably this question is best for you. And how does the United States tax system affect those choices that are made by those foreign-based manufacturers when they evaluate whether to invest in the United States or to go to another country?
Thanks. As I said in my testimony, we do look, we're in many, many countries around the world. We evaluate our projects on a after-tax cash basis. And when we look at the other industrialized nations, particularly in the OECD, what we're seeing now is a U.S. tax rate that is the highest in the world. So what it means is that the mathematics of getting to an after-tax return on investment is very, very difficult when you've got corporate rate differences of 7 to 10 percentage points. In the particular case of Air Liquide over the last 5 years, even with the global recession, we basically doubled down on the U.S. economy. We have doubled our investment in the United States in the last 5 years. We would like to continue to do that, and we think that a system that is more predictable, more simple, and with a more competitive tax rate will allow us, as well as a lot of other global companies, to do exactly that.
Thank you. I want to now just talk about the fact that we need to have all of this. We need to have the global investment into our country, the smaller businesses, and then also the larger corporate businesses that do worldwide work as well. And Ms. Ford, I want to turn to you because you noted that the majority of Corning's employees are located right here in the United States, but 80% of those sales are to customers located abroad, and that Corning also has extensive foreign operations. How do you, or excuse me, how do your worldwide operations affect your U.S. operations and employment, such as areas of R&D and headquarter jobs?
Thank you for the question. Because we conduct probably 99% of our research and development here in the United States, and we are a technology manufacturer, we send our engineers all over the world to our plants where we are located close to our customers, and there's a very strong exchange there. So when at the location they need a certain development piece or they need something done, much of that comes back to the U.S., and we add R&D jobs to support it. And certainly our corporate headquarters is here in the U.S., as well as our IP is maintained here in the U.S. And so we have our fill of lawyers and accountants and corporate folks, and they are also all located in the U.S. So, you know, I've stated previously is that it's not, you know, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not U.S. jobs versus foreign jobs. It's as our foreign markets grow and we're able to continue to compete there, we add U.S. jobs as well.
And I think the importance here is to say that it takes all of this to make a vibrant economy. It's not one. It's not just the small businesses. It's not just the large businesses. It's not the investments that come from foreign entities, but it is the combination of. And I really appreciate you all being here today and sharing what it is from your individual perspective that would be good for moving the United States forward in our taxing area to be able to continue to have and grow a more vibrant economy. So I thank you all so much, because I think this dialogue is so good as we move forward. I think the time, and several of you mentioned this, that you believe that the time is here. I believe the time is here. Obviously, the chairman believes the time is here, and I want to commend him for putting a draft out of the territorials so that you all will have the input, and it is with us all working together as partners that are going to bring us to the conclusion of doing good tax reform that will continue to move this country forward to be the strongest economic country in the world. So thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very interesting hearing.
Well, thank you, and this concludes our hearing. I want to thank all of our witnesses for taking time away from your usual responsibilities to come here and give us the benefit of your expertise. And let me just say that we've been trying to conduct over the last 20 hearings an open process where we actually hear from those who are in industries, and in this case manufacturing, academics, experts, economists, so that we can make the best decision as we try to move the issue forward of fundamental and comprehensive tax reform, because the fact is our economy is not recovering as quickly as we'd like it to see. We still have unemployment that's far too high, and I believe that if we can move the issue of comprehensive tax reform, we will see a pro-growth tax policy that is adopted by this country that helps us do better here in the United States, and also that we can help those companies who are U.S.-based doing business around the world. As you've also articulately stated, we are in a global economy, and we need to make sure that we compete in that way. So I just want to, again, thank you for being here on a very long day, giving the opportunity for members to get the benefit of your experience and advice. And with that, this hearing is now adjourned.